Ready to start now or yeah? Okay. Nice, relaxed start. Unlike Anisha's Sergeant Major attempt, we'll kick off at 10. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So, good morning, everybody, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, farmers from across the nation present physically and virtually with us today. I extend a warm welcome to all of you to the India FPO Dialogue, Catalyzing Agriculture Through Collaboration, organized in partnership with Agribusiness Market Ecosystem Alliance, AMEA, and National Association of Farm Producer Organization, NAFPO. I, Anisha, on behalf of NAFPO and AMEA, would like to welcome you all to this significant event that aims to explore the vital role of FPOs in shaping the future of Indian agriculture. Today, 25th September 2023, also marks India's Antodaya Divas. Antodaya, which means uplifting the most marginalized sector of society through livelihood opportunities to increase incomes. Small and marginal farmers coming together to form FPOs has been identified as the most preferred institutional mechanism for enhancing productivity and income of the farmers. Before we dive into the discussion, let me set stage for today's dialogue. The journey of FPO sector starts from 2002, when FPOs emerged as an alternative to the state-sponsored, state-led cooperatives, being structurally different in membership, governance, and business model from cooperatives. FPOs are viewed as an advantageous alternative to cooperatives, with the key purpose of facilitating smallholder commercialization and increasing farm incomes. The expert committee led by noted economist Mr. Y.K. Alag recommended setting up of producer companies in 2002 by incorporating a Part 9A into the Companies Act of 1956. The objective of the committee was to frame a legislation that would enable incorporation of cooperatives in agriculture as producer companies. The committee recommendation took care of ensuring the unique elements of cooperative business with a regulatory framework similar to that of companies. The initial FPOs were promoted with public policy support that came through bilateral donor schemes such as the District Poverty Initiatives Project in Madhya Pradesh under the Pulse and Vegetable Program with monetary support by the state government. In 2013, SFAC guidelines were issued with the framework of resource institutions, mostly which were non-profits promoting FPOs and mobilizing farmers in the field. Over the last 20 years, thousands of producer companies have been registered in India, engaged in a wide range of activities such as bulk procurement of inputs, aggregation of produce, value addition, and marketing. In the beginning of 2018, there were approximately 9,600 FPCs, and today there are more than 28,000 FPCs in the country. What is interesting now is that the gaps that FPO sector faced in 2013, including lack of finance, markets, human resource, technology, still have relevance for FPOs in 2023. It can be assumed that FPOs by itself cannot address the challenges. This brings in the need for collaboration with private sector, banks, technology players, and supporting organizations. These partnerships, to become successful, will need benchmarking of FPOs so that more organizations are willing to work with the FPOs. These FPOs can become lighthouse FPOs that pave pathway for the sector and ultimately boosting the fortunes of FPOs, their farmer members, and driving prosperity within the agriculture sector. With this, I would now like to invite NAFPO's chairperson and widely known as the father of FPO movement in India, Mr. Pravesh Sharma, to give the keynote address. Mr. Pravesh Sharma is also the director of Samanati Agro Private Limited. So without further ado, I would like to extend a warm invitation to you and would request you to take stage and address us. Thank you.
Thank you. Warm welcome to everyone. And as is the curse that I have borne for the last 10 years, I have to begin by outright denying any claims to paternity. I have one daughter who I own up to. I have nothing to do with her. I was just, I think, privileged to be around at a certain point of time in the government when there was a receptivity to some new ideas. And this was one idea which I pushed. And anyway, now there's a momentum of its own. I have consciously reduced public speaking on this theme in the last 2 years because there is already now so much being spoken of. There is so much innovation happening. There is so much energy. that if I was to run into a bus when I walked out of this, I think I've a very contented sense that it will take its own direction, but it is on its way. Today, you cannot reverse this. Till about maybe 2015, 16, people thought there's another hothouse plant from the government, one person's hobby horse. ठीक है, पहले cooperative भी हुए थे. But it has grown because it answers certain basic challenges in the farming sector. And some of you have heard me, so please forgive me. I only a stuck record. The core challenges of accessing capital, accessing technology, and accessing markets. If there is a better alternative, I've always offered, I will be the first one to chase it and push it. But the FPO in our smallholder context offers one of the, it is not the only solution, but it is certainly one of the more effective solutions to solving for these three challenges, right? So as Anisha said, now we are perhaps at about, into the second decade. I began this project in 2012 in SFAC. We are now in 2023. So we've seen a decade, and now we are into our second decade. So I think it will be useful, especially because there are some very distinguished people with very wide experience coming up to speak after this. My little two-bit on the context, which I certainly hope to hear from you, your reactions. If we stick to this theme, how have these institutions performed in solving this ongoing challenge in increasing access to capital, increasing access to technology and markets? I'll limit myself to these three themes. And then I hope to hear other issues also. I'm not saying we have to limit ourselves to this, but this is my understanding. So if I start with capital, which is the fuel that runs the agricultural engine, the understanding when we began was that individual farmers will always have a limitation of the asset base, that is that small plot of land, and any other small asset they may own like cattle or milch cows or whatever, to be able to leverage capital. We have distinguished people from the capital market who understand much better, like Hemendra. He'll comment on this. Have we been able to improve access to capital in the last decade? So let's break it up in two parts. On the equity side, frankly, we have failed to have a breakthrough because the law was designed in such a way as to ring fence FPOs from private equity, which seeks an exit, rightly so, seeks a return. Since that route is blocked, so private equity completely then bypassed the FPO sector. Government will always have a limitation. Even with the equity grants, state government, central government, there's some money being put, but that is not going to solve the challenge of having enough equity on the balance sheet of the FPO to leverage debt, right? So in a sense, we began with a DNA defect, I call it. I'm also party to that. There were no strong enough arguments at that time to overcome this. That, okay, you say, no, at least give some partial entry to private equity. How do you then prevent the fate of FPOs replicating what happened to cooperatives? We all know what happened to cooperatives. Because equity could come in from, all kinds of sources, government stepped in, there is over control, over regulation. The one, I would say, perhaps it's a, contradictory argument, but I would say that the growing numbers and the survival of FPOs is partly because there could be no capture, whether by government or by private capital. Yes, it's a limitation. We need to think through in the next phase how to solve it. I may have some ideas. We'd like to hear Hemendra and other experts on this issue. On the debt side, things are slightly better. When I began this, I used to evangelize in bank meetings, SLBCs. I addressed the IBA 2 or 3 times. But there was absolute no flicker of interest. They said any new asset class of institutions needs to be developed for a period of time. We have to see whether they can be efficient users of debt capital. Only then can we, put and they have the argument of public money. We are dealing with public money. We are trustees, so we can't touch this. 3 years down the road into the project, we realized that we need to de-risk the banks from, the lending. So the idea of the credit guarantee fund came up. There again, there is a design flaw, though I pushed very hard to include NBFCs at that time, but the Ministry of Finance said, no, you first roll it out for the banks, and if the response is good, then after 2 years, we'll review it. Of course, that never happened. But an 85% cover on the loan was still not enough to convince the banks to start lending to. Yes, a trickle started. It was really a trickle. And it is to Anil's credit, he's not here, that he was the first person in the from a core financial background who said that, no, this is an asset class that can be developed with some risk capital. So I met him, I think, in the last few months of my tenure at SFAC, and 2-3 years spent failing to convince banks. And here's this guy who comes and says, I want to lend to FPOs. Can you help me? I said, lock the door before he runs out, and changes his mind. So anyway, I would say Samanati's pioneering role in actually putting this on a pathway to attract other players. I think he's played a great role. And yes, private equity backed him. And that's exactly what risk capital, venture capital is for. So certainly that has grown. Now, in fact, I was on a call just before coming here, and there were some people reporting that banks are crowding out Samanati. So they wait for Samanati to do the initial loan. And if that FPO has a repayment history of even 6 months, Kuldeep will share this, the banks start chasing and say, okay, we'll replace your Samanati high cost loan with a lower cost loan. HDFC, somebody told me, he's starting to offer 9% loans. Yeah. Have they offered it to you? No. Not yet. Take it if they offer it. So I'm saying maybe the private banks are a little ahead now of the public sector banks. NAPKisan, which was so conservative, has lowered many of its lending criteria to try and mimic the Samanati strategy. Anyway, I'm not plugging for Samanati on this platform. That's just incidental, just to share. So I'm saying, while equity side remains a challenge and we need new ideas, on the debt side, things have started moving. Certainly nowhere close to where we need to be, but I believe that this decade will see some very interesting models rolling out. One key, I would say, missing piece, which would enable this debt process to accelerate, is some kind of public registry or some sort of data bank where the entire basic information about FPOs could be available. Anish has done some pioneering work to create at least a static database of all the registered FPCs, pulling it from the ROC database. I think there's some work which needs to be done there to put in a search engine so that people can, have a little more granular information. But I think a public registry would be a great push to this whole idea. And I'm hoping that there are some people from the technology world here who see this as an interesting challenge to solve. Okay, that's about capital. When I look at markets, again, the picture is slightly sunny, slightly clouded. Just like in the case of access to capital, the initial attempt to try and position FPOs as potential market functionaries who could offer aggregated produce to bulk buyers beyond the local market, bypassing the local mandi, that inevitably ran into the resistance that we had expected from the local traders, from even the corporates were not at all convinced that FPOs could deliver. Initially, I tried to get FPOs into the government MSP procurement system. Some of them performed some wonderful results. Gujarat did some work. Madhya Pradesh did some very good work. Maharashtra did some very good work. But that is always a fickle policy because government policy changes with the political regimes. So there was a period when there was support, then that support was withdrawn. We won't go into that. In any case, that is not a sustainable strategy. The sustainable strategy is that huge volume of 300 million tons plus And if we add horticulture, then something like 650 million tons of crop which comes into the market every year. Today, maybe the FPOs have less than 1% share, right? How is this to be changed? And maybe I'll share some thoughts in my closing bit. But the situation today is that there are dozens of examples of market linkage, but they are all at, I would say, suboptimal level, right? As a company, again, Samruddhi tried to even take inventory risk. We burned some money, did almost 200 crores of business with FPOs in 1 year. It at least helped to establish that FPOs are capable of delivering large volumes at sustained quality at the right time, at the right place. But honestly, except ADM, I must name them because they are an exception. ADM has consistently been buying directly from FPOs and farmers, though the majority of the supply comes directly from farmers, not from FPOs. But there are 4, 5, 6 FPOs in the vicinity of their plant in Karnataka where they have been buying. Except for ADM, there is no other big corporate example of direct buying. They prefer the market intermediaries. There are a host of reasons for that, the reputational risk, the operational challenges. There is, I believe, a space there where some innovation is possible. On technology, I would say we have only a very sorry picture to present. And we're not talking about agricultural technology. Agricultural production technology is available on the shelf. There's no issue about that. But when we talk about technology to enable FPOs to function as efficient SMEs, as rural enterprises, unfortunately, we have no success even of a, and Hemendra, I hope we'll talk about that. He's the father of the agri-tech industry of India. Okay, let me see if he denies that. We have not had a success, and not for lack of trying. To be honest, again, I have to name, TCS has struggled with it for over a decade. I have engaged with them in every iteration of their technology offerings. It has not helped the FPO to solve even basic ERP problems, the basic account keeping, inventory control, engagement with members. Either it's too expensive or it's too complicated. We are currently engaged, I was telling Monica, in a sustainable agriculture project in Madhya Pradesh with Madhya Bharat. Yogesh, I think, is not here today. And as many of you know, the whole sustainable or responsible soya production rests on a certain series of protocols that have to be followed. That's all. It's called an internal control system, that you will do this in this phase, you will not do this, whatever. So that is monitored. Currently, it is being monitored through these field books. I went and saw. It's a 30-page book with the CRP is filling, right? So now, obviously, he can't go, each CRP is dealing with 200 farmers. He can't go to the fields of 200 farmers and fill out this book, right? We engaged with technology companies, even in the US, at the beginning of this project earlier this year, and said, can we convert this form into an e-form or a digital form? Many people, to be fair, put, I think, time and resources behind it, but they could not come out with a solution which solves that poor CRP's problem. He's still going around filling in those copies. So now, when I went to see this last week, he's also improvised. So instead of going to 200 farmers' fields, he calls meetings of 30 to 40 farmers. And they're like a roll call, right? Kitne logon ne meeting kar li? Tick, tick, tick. He also has to survive, right? He's under pressure to report in his system. So I'm saying this is a very crude example, but I'm saying we are not there on any of the, we've not been able to tick any of these boxes. Maybe it's not glamorous enough, attractive enough, and it's certainly perhaps not a remunerative enough market. I have to say this, right? It's not a remunerative enough market. We can't expect these FPOs to fork out, some kind of SOHO subscription rate to run their ERP. So there we are. And this, I believe, has also partly contributed to the restrained growth of the whole FPO sector. Not in numbers, registration is fine. Obviously, government is spending so much money, new registration will take place. But if I were to count the number of 100 crore plus FPOs, 25? ज़्यादा बोल रहा हूँ? Certainly under 50. The number of FPOs who are doing 100 crore plus turnover is less than 50 out of 28,000, as she says. So there is a huge amount of, I think, bridging that has to be done. So I'm going to, not bore you further. I'll just close with 2-3 thoughts, which are ideas, which I'm putting out in every forum. This decade, the survival of this moment, or it's becoming irrelevant, is going to focus or hinge on innovation, right? When the FPO idea came, it was considered quote unquote innovative. Let me also share with you that in government, the most dangerous word is if something is classified as innovative. Innovative means it's dead, because innovative means risk, right? And to be fair, the risk of failure in government is very high. Potentially, I could be sitting here without a pension, but I'm lucky that I, still enjoying a government pension because I did not perhaps put my head in certain nooses. But innovation is very dangerous. But innovation should happen outside the public space. It has to be then upscaled with government public money. The entire investment in the FPO initially began through some externally aided projects. It didn't happen in government. But once that pilot showed that certain potential was there, that's what I brought to convince the, my bosses that, listen, this piloting has been done, this thing works. So public money was put in to upscale it. Fair enough. I think that's exactly how it should be. So there is a need to create innovations in institution management and building, in how equity could come in how debt instruments could change, in how technology could be applied, in how marketing linkages. We need innovation all across these 3 pillars of capital, markets, and technology. I don't want to go to specifics. Some people are working on ideas. I hope I'm not breaching of confidence, but maybe Kuldeep should share the thought on creating a JV between an FPO and a private entity. At least whatever you can share without compromising the idea, please do. I'd rather that you did it instead of me, right? But I believe that's one of the very promising ways forward, right? To overcome this challenge of bringing in more equity, bringing in high quality managerial talent, and then upscaling very rapidly. Second, we need innovation in infrastructure. That's something which has been completely ignored in this last decade. We believe that, okay, FPO, hired shop, end of story. No, I think today we need to equip the FPO with slightly higher quality infrastructure. At the very minimum, I believe every FPO must have a go down, because all the trials that we attempted for pledge finance floundered on the unavailability of I would say, properly costing storage space. All the commercial storage space is too expensive to make the model work. AIF began with good intentions, but unfortunately that model is very complicated. If I could help it, I would say that every FPO on registration should be given a 90% grant to put up an go down. Their 10% contribution should be, you bring the plot of land from one of your members, get it donated. I think that's fair, right? That will kickstart a virtuous cycle. And they can open an input shop there. There can be some storage. You could perhaps then attract a corporate buyer saying, listen, I actually have storage of a couple of 100 tons. In my view, it should be at least 500 tons. But anyway, we can go into that. And beyond that, there is a huge opportunity in machinery leasing, for example. We said, okay, if the FPO has to have a custom hiring center, they have to take a loan to buy that equipment. Impossible to service that loan, because we know that that equipment is not going to be used 300 days a year. It'll barely be used 100 days a year over 2 seasons. What are they going to do? So we need some leasing model. I mean, all our airlines run on leased planes. Why can't the FPOs enjoy leased tractors, leased harvesters, etc., etc.? There again, there is some conversation which looks promising. I hope next time we meet 2-3 months later, there may be actually a model on the ground. And lastly, in marketing, I believe that the trick we missed in the last decade, and we were trying to do too many things, but I think just like we addressed the risk of lending through the credit guarantee fund, for some time we have to address the marketing risk through financial instruments. It cannot be put on a corporate that, listen, you take this risk of linking to this FPO. But if things go downhill, well, you take the hit. I mean, they are also answerable to shareholders and markets, etc. We need to think through what are the kind of risk mitigation devices. It could be insurance, for example, right? I'm not saying price insurance, but there could be different kinds of insurance. Performance insurance. What is the most typical default that happens? The most usual thing is happening is that the FPO is committing to a certain delivery, and that delivery does not take place. So the corporate imposes that, risk and cost penal clause, and the FPO is finished. That's the end of the relationship. So we need to identify these market risks and build in innovative risk mitigation measures. I'm sure some of this may require risk capital, venture capital. Some of this may require even government backing, right? But if we can structure it properly, there would be, I believe, a resonance and a response both from the private equity markets as well as government. I'm going to stop here. I thought I'd take 10 minutes. I've taken more than 15, but thank you so much for setting this up and for inviting me. And I look forward, I'm going to spend at least the next hour and a half here, and I look forward to listening to the distinguished panel that is following. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir, for your insights and setting the tone for today's discussion. Our first session will be focusing on the role of, thank you, sir. We'll be focusing on the role of private sector and financial institutions in strengthening the FPO ecosystem. May I invite Mr. Hemendra Mathur on the podium, please? Mr. Mathur, can I have a round of applause, please? Thank you. Has over 25 years of experience in venture capital, private equity, management consulting, and investment banking. He is currently working as venture partner with Bharat Innovation Fund, investing in early stage deep tech startups across sector. He is also the co-founder of ThinkEgg, a platform for accelerating the adoption of innovations in agriculture space. He is a management graduate from IIM Ahmedabad.
You didn't say father of the agritech industry. Introducing all flower pattern lens. Those should be confused.
Then Ms. Manila Mahindra, who is the manager of Samanati Foundation and has more than 15 years of experience in the FPO ecosystem. Please, thank you. She has previously worked with SFAC in the implementation of FPO scheme by the Government of India. She is currently leading the FPO promotion project with Samanati, which has taken a value chain-based approach for all its agriculture solutions and has its presence in 5 states across the country, working directly with the small farmers. Then Ms. Pratima, who is a development professional with 25 years of experience in poverty, rural livelihoods training, and coaching women entrepreneurs. A seasoned program manager and team leader with extensive field experience, strong communication skills, and experience in proposal development, research, and consultancy in India. Currently, she is working as the capacity building expert with the IFC. She's an economics graduate from Miranda House and alumni of Firma Anand. Then Mr. Rajnikant, who is a development professional with 19 years of work experience in rural livelihood promotion, mainly in project implementation, management, and leadership, advisory, business development, capacity building, and partnership. Before joining Grameen, he has worked with organizations like Pradhan, Access Livelihood Consultancy, and Basics Limited. Thank you. Over to you, Pratima.
Thank you, Anisha, for the introduction. Thank you, everybody, for joining in today for this panel discussion. I'd like to once again welcome my eminent panel members and look forward to learning from this panel during this panel discussion. So basically, the topic that we are looking at is what is the role of the private sector and financial institutions in strengthening the FPO ecosystem. So, so what are we going to look at? We have, I think, about 90 minutes. So I think what we would like to do is to learn from our panel what's happening on the ground, what are these institutions doing with FPOs, what is their experience, and also what are the challenges that they're facing. And from this, like, summarized experience, like, synopsis of what they know and what they have learned over decades of experience on the field. So we'll draw some conclusions on how we can go forward, what we can do better, what we can do more, and how we can build capacity finally to do a better job and to work better for the small and marginal farmers. Yeah. So thank you once again. I think I will like to start off with just by saying, like, okay, why this topic? I think probably is not required. Pravesh ji ne bahut acha, he has built a background for why private sector and financial institutions. So when we are looking at the ground picture, like, if you are a FPO, there is just no way that you can avoid the private sector or finance. If you even if you have 100 members, as soon as you're formed, your basic functions are that you have to aggregate from the farmers, you have to provide them inputs. For both of these, you have to engage with the private sector. So your core functions are all really dealing with the private sector. So once you're dealing with the government is over, you're really having to engage on a continual basis with the private sector. So, and then when you engage with the private sector, you don't have the money, because most FPOs, I think, have about 1 lakh rupees, which is totally insufficient for them to function. So, so basically, we are looking at how are we going to you cannot avoid dealing with the private sector agencies. You cannot avoid dealing with financial institutions. So, so given that this is so critical and important, I think this is a much needed discussion which we need to take forward. And so I'd like to speak with we'll have a informal question and answer session with our panel. And so I'd like to ask my panel members, Manila, what's your, if you're representing Samunati. So what are you doing with FPOs on the ground?
Good morning, everybody. And thank you for inviting me to this panel. So on behalf of Samunati, what we have been doing with FPOs, this is a question. So with FPOs, we are promoting FPOs in 5 states now. But our engagement with the FPOs is quite old. It's not a new collaboration that we have done. We are working with FPOs. So what kind of work we are doing? We are financing the FPOs. We are doing some market linkage with the FPOs. And now we have also moved into this promotion area where we have formed FPOs in 5 states. And when we say that we are working with FPOs, so we are also doing their capacity building. We are giving them some food for thought also, why you should be formed and how you should be working. So the complete sustainability, their institution building, we are working on very different aspects of FPOs on ground. So as this session will move forward, we'll discuss more about what Samunati is doing with the FPOs.
Thank you. So Manila, you mean to say you are lending to FPOs, right?
Yes.
So the main activity, would you say, is providing loans?
We can say we have different segments or extended hands, we can say. Durga ji is there and she is having different hands for Trishul, Chakra and everything. So that way, if we see Durga in Samunati, so we have a extended hand of extending something financial to them. to the FPOs. Then there is a market linkage, and then we have a foundation which is doing a lot of capacity building and working with the FPOs. So when we talk about financial lending, so this was a matter when we saw these FPOs with the advent of this revolution. We saw that the FPOs, they were not able to have a lifespan of more than 2 years or 3 years. They used to have a natural death. So it was thought, a lot of studies were done, and like different organizations, they had a thought that why this is happening. So because the FPOs were being formed by different organizations under some of the other projects, government was giving this go ahead for forming of FPOs. So when this study revealed that these FPOs, they are formed, but what about their institution building? Who is going to look after that if they don't have HR, if they don't have the most required thing, that is working capital? So then Samunati came up with a loan that is like, it was working earlier also, but then a instant loan, pre-approved loan, IPL, which is very helpful for the FPOs. And like we have lended almost 750 FPOs, and we have covered like 750 FPOs, and we are looking forward to more FPOs lending them. And this IPL loan is of 5 lakh rupees. It is no collateral loan. So the FPOs, it's a win-win situation for them, because the banks were not ready to lend them any money without collateral, and the FPOs were recently like formed, and addressing this working capital issue was not sufficient for them. So that is why Samunati came up with this IPL thing, and it is a boom, and we are looking forward to lending, I think, some 600 more FPOs in this year.
Thank you, Manila. I think, so just to understand a little more on what activities the private sector is doing. So can I request Hemendraji, can you just talk about how the private sector is engaging with FPOs? What are the main activities that they are doing? And if you can just give us a summary of how private sector is engaging.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Fatima. Yeah, we'll talk about that, but I would also like to address one of the very pertinent issues which Pravesh sir raised, very well articulated. I think 50% of the solution in defining the problem. So I think he has done that job already. But I think it's a good forum to debate, why access to capital and access to market and access to technology, all three is not happening at the scale as we all want to see. So I'll give the other side of the picture. So let's start with access of capital. Clearly, I think that's extremely important, both debt and equity, as we discussed, as Pravesh sir also said. I think from an equity perspective, I can tell, because I come from that industry, I think there are two fundamental challenges funding an FPO, be it venture capital or private equity. One is what I call the cap table challenge. How is the shareholding distributed among the various shareholders, right? Typically, when you invest in a company, you want to look at a very clean cap table, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 members at most, and typically proportionate to the value contribution by each of the members, right? I think that is extremely important. When I get into an FPO structure, there are 500 to 1,000 farmers. I think that makes investor nervous. How can I invest in a company when there are so many shareholders? So I think to me, that's a big structuring issue, but a solvable issue. And I think Sahyadri Farms at least demonstrated that solve for it. They kind of created another company where shareholding was to the liking of to the investor, and they tried to solve for it. But I think that is one area which we should think about. To me, solution lies in structuring companies in such a way that the investor need not deal with hundreds and thousands of shareholders. He deals with 1 or 2 or 3 entities, who in turn deal with farmers. I think that is something we need to think about. Now, again, of course, one can question if farmers not the shareholders, how they're going to benefit out of it. So again, I think one has to think, what kind of structure that need to be developed. So ultimately, the farmer gets the benefit. But it's an open question, open for debate. And I think it is a solvable issue if we put our brains together. I think second reason for not investing into FPOs is simply the trading margins are not attractive. Unfortunately, fortunately, most of the FPOs are trading, right? And there is commodity risk, there's a pricing risk, and over and above that, you make 1% to 5% margins, weighs the value creation which is happening. So I think that is another big challenge that we need to figure out a way to make FPOs attractive, not just from scale perspective, but also can it be a 20% gross margin company? Can it grow to $100 million scale, hopefully with a 20-25% GM and 13% EBITDA and 7% PAT? I think those are the questions that need to be answered to be really attractive from equity perspective. And I think that's where the challenge and opportunity is. To me, success of FPOs has to go hand in hand with their ability to aggregate farm produce, with their ability to some extent aggregate farmland, and clearly with respect to their ability to integrate the value chain. I think unless we do all of this together, FPO as a standalone concept, I don't think it's going to scale beyond a point, right? I think farm produce aggregation is probably simple because if they are part of the group, they can buy together, sell together. Farmland consolidation to me is a bigger challenge, but thankfully we are in another big problem, which is access to labor, which is becoming more and more difficult. To me, farm level consolidation in India is going to be driven not by any regulation, but by the sheer challenge that there's not enough farm labor. Drones can't fly over 1 or 2 acres of land. You need 100, 500 acres of land to fly a drone. Likewise, you want to use a tractor, you want to use a harvester for mechanization to work at its scale. You need, aggregated land. You don't need 1 or 2 plots of land. So I think that also is going to be critical. How do you, and that also probably addresses Pravesh Sharma's question on access to technology. And of course, he also mentioned about mechanization and leasing opportunity, etc. And also, thirdly, the value chain integration. As I mentioned, if you're just buying and selling with 3-4% margin, who's going to invest in you? So as I mentioned earlier, also FPO has to migrate to FPPDO, Farmer Producer Processing and Distribution Company, right? Because whether we like it or not, the whole margins in the food value chain is skewed towards front end. The margins of Marico or the Levers or PNGs of the world who sell food products are very different from margins of Ruchi Soya and sort of whatever, any ADMs of the world which are on the back end side. So I think that is a way forward. How do you go further into value chain? And that's where again the role of technology comes in, and I'm just talking digital tech, which a lot of people confuse whatever agri-tech with digital tech. I think that story is done and dusted. I think it's much more than that. You have to build hard infra. I think investors are also realizing, the VCs who always shied away from investing in hard infra are much more open to that because they know without digital physical approach, the companies are not going to make money. And I think we are sitting on a huge opportunity for decentralized storage and processing. Sir talked about each FPO owning a go down at least. I think that could be the starting point. But even simple processing like sorting, grading, packing, that adds 10-15% to the margins. There's so many examples of it. Look at Apple. The reason Apple is sort of one of the, I would say, relatively more successful value chains because there's some bit of primary processing happening right in the hills. There's so many CS storages and that's conveyor sorters, they have come up, and it's not very expensive capex. That's one example. Dehydration. It's such a simple technique. I work with a company called As4S Technology. They sell dehydrators at 1 lakh to 1.5 lakh rupees. But by simply using that, you're converting, you're dehydrating whatever fresh fruits, vegetables, spices, and selling the dehydrated products, and the margins look upwards of 20%. In commodities like onions and garlic, turmeric, and now they're doing a lot of staple product also. So I think that also has to go hand in hand, right? And I think that's where the role of startups coming back to your question, that to me, on paper, it looks like a great symbiotic relationship between FPO and startups. Startups are pretty good in building markets. They will go to ITC, they'll go to mention about ADMs and Cargills of the world and get the some sort of demand in place. So they do a good job of demand aggregation. They build some sort of tech which create transparency, some efficiency, right? Some traceability in the value chain. But what they lack is their connect with the farmers, right? And that's where I think the agri-tech is ultimately going to move, if they have to scale, is to how do you figure out ways and means to connect with the farmers. Many tried to connect directly with the farmers. It failed because it needs a lot of resources. They don't even enjoy trust with the farmers. Why would farmer entertain them? So what a go-to market? One is, of course, typical corporates who are present in those geographies and value chains. You talk to them, right? Like you go to Western, you partner with DCM Shriram, for example, right? That's one way. Second is people have figured out this village level micro entrepreneur model, which is, I think, also successful. Typically, these VLEs come from rural areas. They enjoy a lot of credibility among farmers, and they become sort of a partners with AgTechs to take this solution to farmers. But FPO as GTM, I don't think still very well explored. We don't have too many case studies around it. Having said that, yeah, there is some work happening. I think part of the IFC project that, what we are trying to do is connect AgTechs with the FPOs. I think in 3 states, MP, UP, and Telangana, it's a state government is partner to a project, and out of like 24 AgTechs that we've taken to the state governments, I think at least 50% have asked, show us the right FPOs, right? So we need to do some sort of curation. I think that's where is the role of NAFPO and ecosystem players like us. How do we do curation between startups and FPOs in terms of geographies and value chain at least?
Yeah.
And I completely agree with search points on public registry. Today, I am helpless. How do I figure out, which FPOs where, what are they doing? And if we can create something like that, I think that's a great starting point. So I'll probably stop here.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing the private sector perspective so clearly. Clearly, it looks like, you're putting a round peg in a square hole, but then that is where the FPOs are. And so you need some kind of an adapter mechanism, right, to connect the two. So the way they are, they're not going to fit. So I just thought, like I would ask Rajnikantji, having worked so closely with FPOs, what has been your experience of working with the private sector and with financial institutions? And what did you feel? What activities did you do? And how was the experience?
Thanks, Pradyumaji. Yeah, thanks to NAFPO and AMEA for organizing this. And once again, that I'll thank to Pravesh sir, that the point that the issues and the challenge that he brought out, really that it's touched a lot. And after a last 10 years that I'm working on this front, especially in UP. So first of all, that I would like to bring some, as usual, that I usually try to bring the ground realities, and then that will move forward. So I'll give you that recently that as a part of that Walmart supported project Mandi, we are conducting the landscape study in Eastern UP. I'll give you one example that recently, it's a very, very recent data. In 3 districts, 11 FPOs, chili potential market surplus is something around 200 crores. That kind of, okay. Tomato, 8 FPOs, 4 districts, 117 crores. Altogether, 27 FPOs in around 10 districts. The market potential market surplus is altogether 16 commodities are there, 900 crores. But where we are in terms of FPOs, okay. So touching that ground okay, the surplus is there, market surplus is very visible, but why that market link is it's not happening, and why that turnover that sir was mentioning that
even that 28,000 FPOs are there right now. Okay. And very few FPOs are touching that 10 crore, 15 crores, 20 crores turnover. So where that, and this concept already, I think that this concept 15 years, 16 years that we already passed, but these things are not moving. So if surplus is there, things are there, then why things are not happening? So I'll just take example of this Chile itself. Okay. So ultimately, one part is that the buyers look for volume. Okay. And with volume, they will look for the quality things. So one aspect is that just take example of Chile in Eastern UP. While showing that that nursery, that I think that around 15-20 varieties are seed that they grow. Okay. So one part which is very clearly that once we talk about the market, so certainly that the good buyer, the reputed that buyer, they will look for the standardized product. Okay. And in our cases, that n number of variety that is there, n number of the shapes of that the product is there. So that one aspect is that standardized product that is not available, and it's not with this Chile. It's with that mostly that whatever that commodity that is grown in that area. And then okay, that even that will ensure the quality volume. Then the next thing which come out at FPO level is the capital part. Okay. Right now, with the Hemant sir was just talking about that, even that I will deny that it's not a 500,000 farmer base. It's hardly the active farmer base in a FPO. Those they are on this output front, it's hardly 200, 300 maximum. They're not able to serve. They're not able to serve. The reason is that they don't have a capital. The maximum capital that the paid up capital that is available is maximum right now, even after 15 years, 20 lakhs rupees, 15 lakhs rupees, maximum 30 lakhs rupees. And with that quantum of that volume of that capital, you cannot do a business of something of 5 crores, 10 crores that you were thinking of. Even if the market potential is there, that you need to have a sufficient capital. And right now the whole situation is that nationalized banks, no, that still they are into backseat. Lot of that hurdles are there, even that they claim, but things are not happening at a ground level. NBFC thanks that they came forward and that they have supported the FPOs and things, but the quantum, the things which I am trying to raise that the quantum of that the capital that is required to reach to that volume of business, that is not there. And if you see their balance sheet of FPOs or that the profit and loss account of that most of them hardly that they are able to earn. So without capital, unless until that you'll able to reach that attain the economy of scale, you'll not able to generate the profit. Once you're not able to generate the profit, you'll not able to meet your operating costs. Once that you're not able to meet the operating costs, it's hardly like that the right now that which is happening at a ground level it's a simply FPO become a 4-5 member 4-5 log ka ek dukaan ban karke that it's got limited to that part. So what I'm trying to raise, surplus is there. Even that buyers, but again that on the buyer side again, I'll say very limited number of that buyers, institutional buyers are there. The reasons are a number of reasons. Okay, that quality produce is not there, volume is not there. But again, the institutional buyer ki baat karenge, then it's very limited number of. In my case in UP, last year that on the wheat front that ITC has, and it's that everywhere that they do. But on the wheat side, that very actively that ITC has played a very important role. On the vegetable side, Mother Dairy has played a very important role. But I'll say very limited number of institutional buyers are active at a ground level. And the reasons are again like that standardized products are not available, capital is not available. And again, one important survey which the Pravesh was saying that we don't have the FPO level that database is not there. In which location, how much produce is available? We will talk a lot about that aggregation, aggregate karo. But where is that data? In which location? Suppose if you have a catchment area of 20 villages, in which village what produce is there? What is the quantity of that produce is there? That data is not available. Then how that buyers? Suppose I'm FPO and I'm trying to convince the ITC. Certainly ITC will ask me कि which कहाँ पे कितना produce है भैया बताओ तो सही. And then the time that okay, हमने बोल दिया कि okay that I have this much volume of that produce is there. with me. But at the time of aggregation, जब बात आती है, then simply what's happened? Ultimately, we failed to supply. We failed to that regards to the contract that we have made with the buyers. So all these nitty-gritties are there, and there that's like that we think about that the private sector will come and they will work very closely with the FPOs. But a lot of things, lot of that gaps are there. I think that gaps in terms of standardization of product, then capital, then your information, data, and again, sir was mentioning about the logistic. It's very important. I'll give you one example. In Balrampur last year, that we produced this zinc fortified wheat. Okay, somehow that ITC rejected. They told, we'll take as a normal produce. One buyer that is there based at Hyderabad, Our Food Private Limited, they agreed. They told, okay, give me the one truck. Even just to give you the example, while aggregating one truck, it took around 15 days. Okay, and then ultimately what happened at a peak season? What's happened that as Sir was mentioning about this labor problem, and then also that at the peak time will not get that logistic. आपको नहीं मिलेगा, truck नहीं मिलेगा, and that will आपको मिलेंगे, and then आज छोड़ के भागे कल छोड़े. Ultimately, you know what happened? That we used a 40 metric ton to send that 10 metric ton produce. So कहाँ से आएगा profit? If that kind of that adjustment and that at a ground level that reality is there, not able to this concept is not going to help. So ultimately, so a lot of things are there. Unless until that gap need to be filled up, we cannot imagine that this FPO concept itself will be like ultimately that we talk about the economy of scale. We talk about the FPO need to be 100 crores. This need to be taken care of. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Rajnikantji. I think one very important critical thing that you mentioned was that FPOs do not have capital, right? So I think I'd go to Manila again to ask her, how are you dealing with this? And to what extent are you able to meet the capital requirements of FPOs? And what challenges do you face in this?
See, when we say this, that FPOs don't have working capital, they lack somewhere in that area. So now you should also understand these FPOs are not aware that they are in need of the money and where they can go and approach which institution. They only know our banks. When they go and approach a bank tells them, आपकी balance sheet, audited balance sheet लाइए, collateral क्या है आपके पास में. So that is a place like these FPOs find themselves unable to provide them these information, because see, when we see a total process of FPO formation, the BODs, they come into existence. All of a sudden, they're said that you have to manage everything. They were farmers. Now we are asking them to take an extra responsibility of being the board of directors. They have to do this, they have to do that. But who will do that? Capacity building and awareness of these BODs, that they can understand what responsibility they hold. So first problem is these FPOs don't have the capacity, that awareness. Second thing that comes in the pathway of FPO is to collect the share money. You have to go to each farmer and tell them, be our member. Please give me 1,000 rupees. Just consider a case. Somebody comes and tells us, give me 1,000 rupees. How comfortable we are in lending that money to that person. We ask him 110 questions for that 1,000 rupees, if somebody will ask us. And we consider that these farmers should give us 1,000 rupees. They should rely on the FPO with the name this farmer producer organization, and an unknown person has come in and they are asking for money. So second problem is there. Third problem, when the CEO is appointed there, again, his capacity has to be built. This is the problem. So after having all these problems, when the FPO is asked to have a working capital for doing business, so can we understand this problem? See, this problem is not कि बस मैंने एक FPO बना दिया है, अब इसमें कोई आके पैसा भी दे देगा, कोई कुछ इसका एग्रीगेशन भी हो जाएगा और वो जाके अपना परचेस करने की और सेल करने की उसमें शक्ति आ जाएगी। नहीं, ऐसा नहीं है, ये कंटिन्यूअस प्रोसेस है। हम सीधा ये नहीं बोल सकते, हमें इस एफपीओ को भी बिल्ड करना पड़ेगा, इसको समझाना पड़ेगा कि तुमको पैसा क्यों चाहिए। उसको ये पता ही नहीं है कि मुझे पैसा क्यों चाहिए, इसीलिए जब वो बैंक के पास जाता है तो वो एक्सप्लेन नहीं कर पाता है कि सर मुझे पैसा क्यों चाहिए, मेरे पास कोलैटरल नहीं है। और यहाँ पे समुन्नति ने इसीलिए आके इनको ये जो एक आईपीएल का लोन है, हमें जब इसको देना है, ये कोलैटरल फ्री लोन है, इसको देने में भी हमें ऐसा नहीं है कि वो तुरंत बोल देते हैं कि हाँ हाँ हम कर लेंगे, वो अपना केवाईसी करवाने में भी काफी समय लगाते हैं। तो ऐसा नहीं है कि एक फाइनेंशियल इंस्टीट्यूशन है वो तो देने के लिए पैसे तैयार है, बट उस एफपीओ में भी वो ईगरनेस होनी चाहिए कि यस आई एम विलिंग टू टेक द मनी फ्रॉम यू, मैं इसको लौटाने के लिए मेरा ये रेट ऑफ इंटरेस्ट है तो मैं इस पैसे को यूज भी करूंगा। अब उसको ये भी समझाना पड़ता है कि तुमको ये पैसा जब तुम लोगे तो तुम क्या क्या काम कर सकते हो। ये भी एक फाइनेंशियल इंस्टीट्यूशन का ही काम होता है कि बॉस हम तुम्हारा ना मार्केट लिंकेज भी करवा सकते हैं। कैसे करवा सकते हैं, क्या आपके यहाँ पे एरिया में आप उगाते हैं, आप बताइए। तो फिर उसकी सोच आती है कि अच्छा मुझे एग्रीगेट भी करना पड़ेगा, मुझे इसको कहीं एक जगह स्टोर भी करना पड़ेगा कि मैं उसमें सॉर्टिंग रेडिंग कुछ अगर खराब हो गया माल तो उसको भी अलग कर सकूं कि मेरे को वो ए ग्रेड का तो आप ये रेट देंगे बट बी और सी का क्या होगा। बट उसको तो क्या है कि मैंने अपना एक बोरी माल लाया है, अगर उसमें अच्छा बुरा सब मिला हुआ है तो आप ग्रेडिंग मत करिए, सब ए ग्रेड दीजिए। देखिए इतनी सारी चीजें हैं इसमें, बॉटल नेक्स हैं ये, हम इनको क्रॉस किए बिना हम ये सोचें कि फाइनेंशियल इंस्टीट्यूशन जाके बस पैसे दे देगा, ऐसा नहीं है। हमें भी तो कहीं से पैसे मिल रहे हैं जो हमें भी रीपे करने हैं, तो हम एफपीओ को सिर्फ देके कैसे भूल जाएं कि एफपीओ नहीं देगा, इसका रीपेमेंट नहीं होगा तो चल जाएगा काम। नहीं, एफपीओ को अगर हम ये बोलते हैं कि ये कंपनी है तो उसे समझ में होना चाहिए कि ये कंपनी किस तरीके से काम करे। तो इसीलिए फाइनेंशियल इंस्टीट्यूशन जब आप कहते हैं तो वो लेंडिंग करते हैं, वो प्रोडक्ट्स बनाते हैं इस तरीके से कि वो उनको सूट करें, बट दे शुड आल्सो बी विलिंग टू डू। एंड हियर इज व्हेन समुन्नति is doing their bit with the FPOs and we are trying to be with them. I hope I was able to answer your question.
Yeah. So, I think Manila, just to follow up, what are you doing to meet this challenge? जो है challenge तो हम समझ रहे हैं.
जी.
So, what are you doing to meet the needs?
See, such forums are very much required where these FPO CEOs and BODs should be trained and they should be invited to understand why we need money, why we need any kind of support from anybody. पहली बात तो now when we are working with the FPOs ourselves and like I have been understanding this concept since 2011 when I joined SFAC under Sir's guidance, we came to understand what was FPO. So it was like sitting in this hall, yes, under the AC we all can say good things and we can be very positive. But when we go in the fields, the scenario is very different. Sometimes you will see there is no water. Somewhere you will see there is flood. Now they will ask you the question, ये अब आ गया, मेरी तो पूरी फसल खराब हो गई है, अब आप बोलते हो एग्रीगेट करना है, तो मैं कहाँ से करूं। तो हमें ऐसे ही उनको समझाना पड़ेगा। एंड दिस इज वेयर वी as institution in foundation, what we are doing is we are working with FPOs for their capacity building, and in that we are also collaborating with other agencies who are involved in all these things and are specialists in providing training to the FPOs and BODs. So this way Samunati is contributing and collaborating with the FPOs, and we are doing the you can say capacity building is not only this with the thing. This Corona has come in with online sessions. They are comfortable, and now it is easier for us to, on like weekly basis, we are able to connect with the AFPOs, do online trainings for them, and creating awareness. The new joint CEOs earlier, like it used to be कि वो जब join करके 6-7 महीने हो जाते थे, then the CEOs used to understand what is their worth. Now, because of technology, now I will say that we talk about technology, that we don't have data, but now at least technology has given an outreach that sitting here we can reach to the FPOs, to the CEOs, BODs, farmers, and conduct trainings, online sessions also. So this way, Samunati is working with FPOs in their capacity building.
Thank you, Manila. So I think I'll just go over to Rajnikantji. So when you talk about capacity building and what was your experience? How effective did you find the capacity building? Did it specifically, did it equip the FPOs to do things like negotiating with the market? Like, I think your examples show that the FPOs doesn't have the wherewithal, doesn't have the infrastructure or the ability, doesn't have the information. So ये capacity building से क्या होगा? How is that helping? How does capacity building initiatives build the ability of the FPO to function and to engage with the private sector?
Yeah, so certainly that is required, and but a kind of that capacity building that right now that with a lot of that different government scheme that we are promoting, this is that trying to strengthen these FPOs. But the actual the things which is required, even that in that Heminder sir was also mentioning that even that though that the basic skill in terms of sorting, grading, packaging, even that kind of skill will be equipped at a FPO level. So that is again that 10 to 15% that additional that profit they can earn on the market linkage side. But actually a lot of that initiative that right now it's happening, it's a simple concept on that FPO management, and which is very, very superficial. We need to have an in-depth, we need to have a focus that, that once we'll talk about the institutional building, certainly we need to have a three important pillars, that how that we are interlinking, like a member system is there, governance system is there, and operating system, three different aspects any institution will have. Whether that we are able to create that capacity building is able to create coherence or linkages around that or not. So here, like separately, we talk about board of director ki training kara diya, uski governance ki kara diya, that we'll talk a lot of governance karani, board of director ko pakad ke training. No, you need to have that study so that these three pillars can be move in a tandem. वो नहीं हो पाता, and that's everyone is moving silos में, other members को पता नहीं है that what is happening, and that board of directors thinking I'm the leader. So no, how to bring this operating system, governance, and members need to be together. They need to feel like, okay, it's a one unit, it's a one, we are part of institution. That kind of that again that the basic training, like a technology की बात करते हैं, and it's very difficult to infuse at a ground level, and especially and we once, because the problem is that we think from first day farmers जो entrepreneur है. This is impossible. It's very difficult. The changing farmers from a basic nature of farming of farmers to a entrepreneur is very, and this can happen, but this needs a different kind of a capacity building approach. Might be that you need to bring more visual aspects, might be that you need a storytelling, might be you need a exposure visit, give a hand-holding support rather than going for a typical classroom mein baitha karke. And this is happening. Training is there, funder is given money, okay, that in classroom training we are conducting training, otherwise that virtually 4 logo jod karke. So what I'm trying to say, this is the important aspect, capacity building karna hai, but actually the thing which is needed, अगर मिर्ची का कलर चेंज हो जा रहा है तो क्यों मिर्ची कलर चेंज, बिकॉज बायर को तो एक सिमिलर प्रोडक्ट चाहिए उसको, ठीक है. अगर हमें अगर that we are trying to link our wheat produce to ITC, what is ITC, that criteria of that procurement, that kind of that training that need to be given at the ground level, which is not happening. Even that I think that kind of resources are also not available with the resource agencies. Very bluntly, I'm saying that kind of resources are lacking somewhere. So that kind of capacity building need to be there at a ground level so that we can change the ground and we can help the small margin and FPOs. Yeah.
Thank you, Rajnikanth. So Hemenji, just over to you, what he said about capacities, like, we're not actually, we're just teaching them something, but that's not enabling them to engage with the private sector. So my question to you is, do you think that just enabling the FPO is enough, or we need to enable the private sector too?
Yeah, good question. So yeah, of course, I think private sector also need to be taught how to deal with FPO. I don't think culturally they are inclined to do it, sitting in large cities, and, the names which kept coming in today's discussion is ITC, ADMs of the world. Why not Amazon? Why not Reliance? Why not Zepto? For Zomato, the most profitable business is Pure, which is their backend business, the procurement business. So why not Zomato procuring from FPOs, right? So there is something wrong somewhere. So clearly, I think, I don't know whether FPOs can go directly to and pitch solutions to them, or I don't know, someone has to do it for them, right? So that we need to figure out. But I think, again, going back to my last point and mentioned multiple times in the discussion today, probably this public registry work to me is very important for this discovery to be smooth and efficient. At the very basic level, I think what Anisha is doing is also good, name of FPOs and locations, and hopefully we can add value chains. I think that's also a great starting point. How do we institutionalize that directory? I think is a pretty good starting point. I think second level of registry could be what some of the agri-techs have demonstrated, not necessarily for FPOs, but in general for farmers. The kind of work Cropin has done, for example, is building some sort of private stack. Who's the farmer and their sort of land records, farm areas, what they're growing, sort of predicting harvest schedule, so that in what region, what potential procurement opportunity exists for a corporate or a private sector player, right? So that's also, I think, demonstrated at scale in multiple parts of the country and outside India also. I think the third thing, which probably may sound a bit ambitious, but I think is doable, is this whole agri-stack work which is happening at multiple levels. I personally believe it in next 10 years, we want to see at least few agri-stacks operational, at least at the state level. For example, in UP, we've already started with a crop stack where we are tracking 20 crops at a 15-day frequency for 75 districts. I think that's a great start. And of course, hopefully that will ultimately converge into an agri-stack. But agri-stack covers farm ID, farmer ID, and crop ID. I think one option could be where we create FPO IDs and start linking farm IDs, a farmer ID to an FPO ID, right? So you not only know who the farmer is, but you also know whether he or she is a part of an FPO, and if yes, then what is that FPO, right? So I think that to me is some sort of a catalytic effort. We can always say we can always go to private sector and keep on doing pitches on behalf of FPOs, but that's a time-taking process that will take its own time. But I think these kind of catalytic intervention can probably make that engagement more smoother. And thankfully, India is a country of digital public goods, so why not in this ecosystem? So I think that is one thing we should think of. I think second thing from a banker or financial institution perspective is credit rating for FPOs, and I think that is another area we should draw learning from how it started for MFIs. And I think one of the organizations where I'm on the board is MCRIL, who did really a path-breaking work in building credit rating ecosystem for MFIs. And I think gradually started doing for some FPOs, but that's very client-specific kind of work. But again, I don't know whether that's NABARD or RBI or SFAC who will do it. But can we build institutions around FPO credit rating? Let's start with those 20 FPOs which have 100 crore turnover, right? Let's start with that and see how it goes, and probably go to 50 crore or 15 crore. Maybe we have 500 FPOs who have some sort of credit rating, which can be monitored, which can be reported to financial institutions to give them more comfort. And thankfully, as sir mentioned, HDFC is looking at it, and hopefully other Axis Bank, these kind of banks can potentially use those rating mechanism to give loans. So I think these are two things which I can think of. One, more private sector engagement. Third point, which is not related to the question, but I was just thinking, if we look at the success of cooperative movement in dairy, of course, among many other factors, one of the reasons for success is a high degree of gender inclusivity. Because animal husbandry, all said and done, is dominated by women farmers. I really don't know how inclusive FPOs are. Maybe I don't have the data point. But I think that is another area we need to think about. And hopefully, can the challenges we're talking in terms of the operational management and compliance and reporting and leadership, hopefully can be solvable with this kind of a framework. I'll stop here.
Okay, thank you. I think I can reword my question, is when the private sector is engaging with FPOs, do they need to be sensitized? And do they need to rethink, okay, how can I deal with this? Instead of saying, okay, this is what I want, and I'm not getting it, right? So what do you think about that, about the private sector also modifying its approach?
Look, private sector, end of the day, is a commercial organization. They're driven by profits, right? Charity happens on the side, and that's a bonus, right? Which is fine. But I don't think they're going to, at least I think they're not going to make an extra effort to reach out to FPOs and say, we want to work with you and all that. I don't think that's happening. That's going to happen. So let's be very honest to ourselves. Maybe if someone want to do out of a CSR project, they may want to engage with them, but I don't see it's happening at a scale. And that's why we need some bridges or linkages in between, right? Who can make it happen? At least have few success stories, like Sahyadri working with Unilever. I think the most of the Kisan ketchup is largely processed at Sahyadri's farm now. But that's a pretty commercial engagement. I don't think, levers went to them just because they wanted to help FPOs. Right? So I think that is the approach. We need to, frankly, for private sector, what they want, aggregated volumes. They want assurance on quality. They don't, most of them are very good on front end distribution, branding, etc. They're very poor on, or at least they want to invest in building the supply chain where FPOs can play a role. So I think we need to find that chemistry and figure out how do we share economics, in making that happen. How will private sector save 5% of the cost by working directly with FPOs? And will FPOs earn 5-10% more money by working with private? Ultimately, I think it's the economics which is going to drive this engagement.
So what you're saying is that the private sector is not going to be flexible. And but then when we talk about FPOs, we're always talking about ideology. We're talking about the small farmer, right? And all the problems we have are because we are small and marginal farmers, then that's not going to go away. So so does it mean that, this bridging has to be done by a third party, would you say?
Maybe to begin with, yes. If it scales up, probably it can happen on its own. And third party, as I mentioned, it would be some of the startups. I think agri-tech startups are probably one of the most obvious choice for me, because they're trying to connect farmers with markets, and markets is usually the front-end players. I think some of them are even trying to reach out to mom and pop stores, but largely institutional private sector players. I think they are a good bridge. But the reason even those models are finding it challenging, because the economics is killing. When you have to share a 5% margin between 3 entities, someone is going to die in that process. So I think it boils down to how do you broaden the margin pool so that everyone earns more or saves more in this process. So I think that to me, and secondly, I don't know if there are some progressive state government, they can also do this job, by the way. And I've seen at least some bureaucracy which is forward looking. So after they do a lot of these investment summit, etc. I'm not talking of those kind of intervention. It's essentially bringing FPOs and private sector together, doing more focused discussions and things like that. They can also play a very important role. Yeah.
Thank you. We have now seen a lot of the experience of private sector, the FPO, and so I think we'll also look at a lot of the challenges that each of these players is facing. So what would you say is, like, just to summarize it all over your decades of experience, what have you learned? What works? Okay.
No, I think I remain sort of optimistic. I know this whole ecosystem, as sir mentioned, is 10-15-year-old ecosystem. So is the tech ecosystem in India. Of course, the innovations have been happening since Green Revolution, but so-called tech ecosystem in India is also relatively new. Even Flipkart is maybe 20-year-old. So I think we should give it a chance. I think it will ultimately happen. I have no doubt about it. But yeah, I think through some sort of interventions, be it from private sector, be it from the government, we can accelerate this, this evolution in some ways. Again, going back to sir's sort of pointers on access to capital, access to market, access to technology. Ultimately, it will happen. Markets will figure it out, but it may take some time. So, what are those catalytic interventions? Like fintech happened because of UPI. Today, all fintech, UPI is at the core of it, right? So I think those kind of intervention, and we need to think scale. I think, of course, we need pilots and case study to sort of demonstrate that it works, but we need to start scaling. Think about scaling. More number of FPOs, more value chains, more farmers. It was a revelation to me that there are only 200, 300 farmers. I always thought it's like 500 to 1,000. It's a correction now in my mind. So how do we engage more, and what are the incentives for farmer to join an FPO or build an FPO? Right. So I think we need to start thinking scale. Otherwise, we may keep debating it forever.
So far, you're saying nothing has worked.
No, I'm not saying nothing. There are, of course, we have people in the room who have demonstrated success, and I have seen.
What is that has worked?
I think it's from FPO perspective, clearly is their ability to engage closely with farmers, helping not forget about more income. It's about assured income. That's I think itself is a big value proposition. Making payments on time to farmers is another value proposition. And if you can sort of ice it with the value addition at the front end, which some FPOs have demonstrated, as value addition, as I mentioned, would be as simple as storage or some primary processing. I think then it creates a very good model, and we have empirical evidences. I hope it becomes more and more mainstream.
Okay, so thank you, Himanshi. Rajnikantji, so what would you say has worked? What has worked well?
Okay. A difficult question, but yeah. So yeah, things have been moved. Okay, and so one aspect that is very clear that we need to move from production-led marketing to a market-led production side, which is required, and I think that some shift has been already been done. Okay. Apart from that on the FPO front, that I'm agreeing with that. This what value proposition that these FPOs are bringing at a farmers level. Okay. So some steps have been taken, and that has also worked. But still, the basic question is that why a farmer will join a FPO? Why I'll put my 1,000 rupees? Okay, what value proposition that I'm going to get? Okay, so still that part is still that, as I mentioned, that only 200, 300 active farmers, even that. So ultimately, to bring that value proposition, what we need infrastructure, we need capital, we need technology, we need a good connect with the market. So there, I think things have been moved, but it's a long way to go, and it's not easy to also. So I think that a lot of scope is there. A lot of that, I think, again, it will take 1 decade to. There's something like a dream, like 100 crores ka 10,000 FPO bana. Banega nahi, but 100 crores of 100 FPOs, that vision. So by next decade, we will achieve it. Thank you.
So just a follow-up question. So the value proposition of FPOs, to members is required. What about value proposition of FPOs to the private sector? So how do we?
Yeah. So I missed to that. Yeah. So the value propositions are required at from like institution to institution level, like ITC as an institution, FPO is also institution, and then farmers are there at ground level. So what value proposition ITC is bringing at FPO level? What value proposition FPO as an institution bringing at a farmers level? So this I think that unless until this path will be clear, okay, and the value proposition from the banking side to the FPO level. Right now, that one example I'll give you. Right now, in a nationalized bank, that no product is there, that loan product is there, which is less than 1 year. And I need a loan product of 3 months, 2 months. Okay, मेरा तो loan 1 साल के लिए करोगे आप, close to करो, but in a peak season that is okay, but in lean season what मैं क्या करूँ उस पैसे का? Okay, so I don't think that kind of linkages, that kind of that value proposition, bank has to see what value proposition I'm bringing to FPO level. FPO has to see what value proposition that I'm bringing at a farmer's level. If that linkage will establish, I think that things will improve a lot. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I think Manila, over to you. What do you say has worked well for finance sector?
For finance sector, what has worked well is like more and more FPOs are getting formed. Government is pushing this revolution, and what has worked is continuous engagement with the FPOs. So now they are able to understand. We have engaged with few FPOs in Madhya Pradesh, Karnataka, and Bihar. So like Gujarat. So we came to know that when there was a continuous engagement, we were able to procure and supply. The aggregation, the bulk supplies, they were continuous and they were able to gain a lot. And this has worked. So in my view, you should see FPOs also as an entity, like you see any other private sector company. In the same manner, the FPO should be treated well. So the things which have been working for the betterment of FPO was that the people were inclined towards them. That yeah, this is one farmer company from where I can get good amount of supplies. So be it wheat, like we work for wheat, soya bean, and veggies also. And the supplies gave them a, you can say, encouragement that they wanted to have a continuous collaboration with us. So things are moving positively. And with this movement and the companies are doing a lot of CSR. We have been taking one name, ITC. ITC itself is also forming FPOs now. So this is what is positively moving forward.
Yeah. So I think you mentioned that you are giving a collateral free loan. So that has that worked better?
Yes.
To meet the needs of FPOs?
Yeah, in the like nascent stage, when the FPO is very new and they don't get any funding from anywhere, they don't have a working capital. So that time, if they have to do a business, they have to plunge into something. Like the first thought that comes to when we talk about FPO is opening a input shop. So for that also some money is required. For the license also the money is required. So this collateral free loan of Samunati IPL has worked wonders with FPOs wherever they have availed it, because it's I would say Rajnikant ji can also look towards Samunati, because you want this for a particular time span in the lean season. What you will do, so you can repay us and then again you can take it, get the KYC done once, and this loan is like for a time period you want, you can take the loan. So this has really helped, and the FPOs are availing it. That is why we have reached to 750 number.
So I think, Anisha, would you like to take any participant questions before we summarize?
Yeah, I think we have an audience here itself, if they have any questions.
My question is to Mr. Hemendra. See, if I look the finance journey for the MSMEs in last 2 decades. There could be a lot of learnings there to adopt for the FPOs. What is your view on that?
Yeah, no, you are right. Absolutely. MSME is another important part of the food value chain. I think in fact, a lot of food processing in India is still dominated by small and medium enterprises. So I think one learning which I can think of is of course MSME versus FPO. MSMEs are typically corporate structures. There is some founder who has the who's ultimately responsible for everything. In some cases there is board, in some cases not. But yeah, I think the governance levels have reached to a level where their ability to raise money, both as equity and debt, has gone up significantly. Having said, the cost of capital for MSME still continue to be an issue. Working capital financing at 14-18% is not uncommon among MSMEs. I think what FPO can learn from MSMEs is clearly, I think, as I mentioned, is that they can't just buy and sell to become financially attractive. They have to do more than this. So MSME is also at a basic level doing some processing. Even if it's a wheat milling company, they are converting wheat into flour. Even if the margins are 4%, 5%, but they're at least doing some processing out there, right? There are so many MSMEs in fruits and vegetables who are just doing sorting, grading, nothing else, sorting, grading, packing, but making some amount of money. So I think that is what I think ultimately, to me, FPOs have to move in the direction of an MSME, right? Just it has to be aggregator plus. And that's where some sort of convergence with MSME would help them to potentially attract capital, become more market driven, and become more and more well governed in that process.
Any
And maybe a corporate should be given a chance to present our side of experience in the FPO.
Sure. You want to share?
Yeah.
Sure.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. I'm Anil Parikh from Leads Connect Services Private Limited. And we are an organization who has been working into all three problem area, which actually Pravesh stated, that is the technology, capital, and market. And as we are one of the 4 organizations who are shortlisted for CropStake project in UP, as Mr. Hemendra just mentioned, we are working in digitization of farmer data. So I would like to share my experience of actually dealing with FPOs in a couple of places. I would like to start with actually my experience of dealing with farmers in Gujarat when we went for gram and procurement. And I'm sure Mr. Kuldeep Solanki would agree with me. Actually, what has happened, ma'am, many a time, and there is a trust issue of FPO with their member farmer. Because at the end of the day, as Mr. Mathur actually very aptly put it, it is the economy which drives the whole business association. And so what has happened, we were coordinating with a very large cooperative organization. I would not like to name it. And they were the CBPO, and we were talking to some FPO, and we had agreed upon one specific pricing and all that, and the payment terms. And we have been following it for quite some time, but trade was not happening. So actually we started getting jitters, ke ye ho kya raha hai? Then I just talked to that guy. He said, सर वो जो फार्मर है वो हमारे यहाँ पे चना लेके नहीं आ रहे, वो कह रहे हैं आप हमें एडवांस दीजिए, you pay us. So I said कि we have agreed upon that we will pay to you once the material reaches the buyer location. He says कि सर अब कितना भी कर लिए ट्रेड नहीं होगा. And I said कि वो तो आपके member farmer है, but वो लोग नहीं आ रहे. Then we had to shell out money from our own pocket. Though it was a small sum, but this is how the problem was there. Then we raised this problem with all the other financing institution. And so there is one very, I would say, the welcome change in which I have seen now there are a lot of banks, and we were one of the few entities. We are the last year we were the business correspondence with the SBI, ATBC, and based upon our performance, we were the best performing BC in India. And based upon our performance, they have elevated Leads Connect status to business associate. So we are representing SBI. And other than SBI, as I explained, we are talking to private bank. Even NBFC are very keen. So the whole idea, I totally agree with Mr. Hemendra Mathur that FPO has to become FPPDO, is the processing. Another thing I would like to share one anecdote in Chamarajnagar in Karnataka. We went for procurement of turmeric. So, sir, what we wanted that, we should have curcumin content. And just to inform you that the price varies of turmeric based upon their curcumin content. So I said, okay, you give us that, analysis report. He says, कि नहीं वो तो हम लोग दे नहीं पाएंगे, हमारे पास है नहीं. और ये जो भी हल्दी है, आपको जो लेना है ये इसी पे होगा. And FPO या जो members उनको इतना पता नहीं है. तो I said, ठीक है. Then I sent my person. And what has happened, because when I told to them that by just doing this testing, which will not take more than 2 days and cost 4,000-5,000 rupees, और उस वजह से उनके curcumin content इतना high था, and they were underselling themselves. This was the reason. Same thing happened in Maharashtra. When we told them कि आप इसको double polish करवा लीजिए तो पैसे ज़्यादा मिल जाएंगे, बोले नहीं हम नहीं करवाएंगे. Similar experience with cumin. Cumin में सर बाड़मेर में, as we have seen that वहाँ जैसे मेरे बाड़मेर में जो cumin होता है और उसकी ऐसे इंग्रेडिएंट का वहाँ फैसिलिटी नहीं है, और वो बोलते या तो ऊंझा जाइए या जोधपुर जाइए. These are the some challenges. और सर अगर especially chili ka, like Mr. Rajnikant was saying, so in case first of all I wasn't aware कि UP में chili होता है. Though our parent organization is from UP and I also travel in UP a lot, but chili का frankly मुझे पता नहीं. और last year हमने गुंटूर से ना 400 tons तेजा deluxe लिया था. तो in case यदि particular variety में आपसे one-on-one अगर करूँगा, यदि वो लोग हैं तो I can enter into a forward contract and I will even provide money for input. I can tell you there are a couple of organizations who are willing to give money for purchasing the seed input and all that. So I can help you connect with them. Capital will be taken care of that. Then we have advisory platform. Yeah, we have advisory
connect.
Sure. So we have advisory connect. Any FPO wants to connect, we can help with technology. We have a SaaS-based platform. Capital also there, or market linkage maybe we can help.
Great, thank you so much. I think one more question for this prize.
Thank you. And thank you so much for a very interesting panel discussion. I don't have any question specific, but more of a request to NAFPO. Based on what we listened today, and specifically when Mr. Hemendra was comparing or citing more examples from the startup ecosystem, I think the great learning from the startup ecosystem, and right now India is in the second or the third largest ecosystem of startups, maybe more responsibility if could be taken up by NAFPO, because I think we need someone in this house to bring everyone together at one platform. Generally, when we go back, we have a tendency to only focus on the kind of expertise that we bring in. What we have learned from startup is that, it's the ecosystem that has worked for startups, whether it is policy ecosystem strengthening, whether it was, incubation and acceleration support for startups, or if it is related to even funding, specific funding, which is given to startups based on the levels there are. I think the similar approach is required for FPOs, where we can have someone who fits everyone in one simple machinery so that it functions really well for the farmers. This model has a great potential on ground to see farmers and entrepreneurs. So maybe something similar kind of an effort would be required for FPOs to have a dedicated funding, which is there for the ones who are maybe starting afresh, 1 year, 2 year old. There will be a very different facility, financial, which will be required for maybe term loans for long-term FPOs who have marked certain number in terms of the turnover. there was one specific program which was run in the country, which was called ProSIF, which has really benefited. So we need more of those facilities. So maybe, multilateral institutions also have to be brought in to start thinking, or maybe the DFIs have to start thinking to bring in the venture capital support. So maybe it's a request to NAFPO that, we should be thinking more on these lines, how to build the ecosystem. Maybe I'll just share a few lines with, now Dr. Pravesh is not there, but if he is there, maybe that kind of role, which was led by SFAC, can be done through NAFPO. That will be of great support to the larger ecosystem. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Monica. So I think, yes, okay.
Just that we talked about capital market and technology, and one issue I think which is underlined again and again was the capacity. If you're expecting farmers to become, first of all, FPO as a business entity, then MSME, and like we spend a lot of money doing MBA degrees to get into business. We are asking them to become business people overnight. So this capacity part, which is not just that, as Rajnikant also mentioned, that's one BOD training will not cut it. Two BOD trainings also will not cut it. It's like hand holding. It has to be there for at least 3 years, consistent effort on all three parts. How to get capital, how to get market, how to get technology. So I'm just giving you an example. Our Maharashtra Agriculture Business Network team is here, project director in APD, and they're making that effort. They're really FPOs are given market access, also training, and also the access to finance. So maybe at some point of time, they can share their experience, but this capacity is the most important part, I feel. And we need to really look at examples how Amul has happened or any other milk story. So milk story is not about small organizations. That's a large organization ultimately is able to support smaller organizations. So that aggregation of FPOs also, federated FPOs, that also might happen. So maybe NAFPO's, again, role I will underline and maybe see as to how they can collaborate more, because there's only one of the institutions right now.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So I think I'd just like to summarize all that we've discussed over the last 1 hour. So I think what it appears is that there are no easy solutions. I mean, it's surprising. We are just at 1%, and probably we need to target why can't we think about every farmer being covered? Why doesn't every farmer have access to a good market, to an assured price? Why don't they have information? I'm surprised that the critical information is not there with the farmers, it's not there with the banks, and it's not there with the private sector. So we are in a flood of information and everybody's on their phone. So it's quite interesting that the critical information is being missed. And probably it's an easy thing if somebody puts their mind to it to devise a solution. So I think what comes up about is that the needs of the corporates don't fit with what is available at the FPO level, and you need somebody in the middle to do something like, to say, okay, this is what the FPO is, and the corporate, this is what they need. So you need some middle ground. There is a gap there. And I think the other gap, there are gaps in understanding, okay, this is a reality at the FPO level. I think many of our, it would have been great. We are kind of running out of time to listen to a few more FPO stories, but I think what we see at the FPO level is that capacity building is not sufficient. It is token is because you're not actually able to do what you're trained. So to know and to do are two different things, and to be able to do, you have to reach there. You have somebody to hold your hand. Just giving you the knowledge is not going to help you to be effective in dealing with large giant corporation in any way. So I think that's in sum and substance, FPOs today don't have either capital, they don't have good access to market, and they are not equipped to deal with their members. They don't have a strong membership base. So it looks like we have a really very long way to go. And but somewhere, probably we're all sitting here because in our hearts, we know that the small and marginal farmers are vulnerable and their vulnerability is increasing. So, and we really need to do something about it. So, and all of us need to put our pitch in together. So So I think on that note, Anisha, I'd like to close this panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much for an interesting discussion. Our next session is on the need for benchmarking. We've understood the challenges in the FPO ecosystem, and probably it's time for us to understand if benchmarking could be a solution and if it's time for it. So the next session will start in a bit, but we will break for tea, coffee, snacks, and we'll request everybody to return for the next session. Thank you. Requesting everybody on the outside to please come in. So I would like to welcome back everybody for the next session on understanding the need for benchmarking in the evolving ecosystem. We have an eminent panel for the discussion. May I please invite Mr. Amit Vatsyayan to take the seat on the stage. Mr. Amit is partner Ernst & Young and has 18 years of experience across 15 countries with extensive experience in the agriculture and social welfare sector, which includes numerous projects on value chain analysis and development. The nature of his engagements and projects are highly intersectional and have dealt with governance, planning, policy, issues on climate change adaptation, mitigation, social inclusion, and gender mainstreaming. He's an alumni from Oxford University, UK and IIFM Bhopal. Then Ms. Sheetal Dave. With a career spanning for more than 12 years in the development sector and corporate foundation, Sheetal brings in wealth of expertise in the field. Her core strengths is in Lean Six Sigma strategic partnership program, planning and operation, and have consistently driven towards impactful initiatives. Her professional journey includes organizations such as SL Group, Care India, and Barclays, showcasing her dedication to creating positive change and sustainable growth. Then we have Mr. Kuldeep Solanki, CEO of Gujpro Agribusiness Consortium Producer Company Limited, which is a federation of 30 FPOs working in Gujarat. Mr. Kuldeep has intensively worked on peanut value chain and on strengthening of FPOs. He has more than 18 years of professional experience, during which he has worked with NGOs and then with FPOs. From 2012 to 2017, he has worked in the capacity of Executive Director of Sajata Sangh, which is a network of prominent NGOs working in natural resource management and agriculture in Gujarat. Then we have Mr. Dheeraj Mutreja. He has worked for Rabobank since 2018 as a member of the Rural and Development Portfolio team in India. He structures mixed financial and special products in the agriculture sector, specifically for agtech companies and smallholder farmer organizations. He also facilitates partnership with financial institutions, farmer organization, government and development organizations. Mr. Dheeraj also holds an MBA from IIM Kozhikode. Then finally, Mr. Sami Saran, who oversees India operations as the Deputy Country Representative of Tanager International. Prior to joining Tanager in 2022, he served as team leader for Feed the Future Bangladesh Rice and Diversified Crops activity funded by USAID and implemented by Tanager's affiliated organization, ACDI and VOCA. He has more than 30 years of experience leading corporations such as Olam International, etc. Mr. Saran also holds an MBA from International Trade from IIT New Delhi. Thank you. Over to you, Sheetal.
Thank you, Nisha, for such a warm welcome. And I think from the previous session, the relevance of our topic, becomes much more prominent. I think during the break, I was speaking to some of you, and we could see, some of the elements when we talk about benchmarking or, how that processes and system looks like for the farmer producer organization. So I think we're going to delve into that. But I think a quick background, I represent Genpact, and I'm sure some of you in this room might be thinking what Genpact does. We have a CSR program called Better World Initiative, and here we offer pro bono consulting to nonprofit organization. It's a long year program. We've been running this program for last 8 years, and in past 3 to 4 years, we have had the opportunity to work with nonprofit organization where they wanted us to look into the supply chain processes of farmer producer organization. So when we talk about benchmarking, some of the work we've been able to do, bringing about process standardization, how we look at benchmarking. I think last 3 to 4 years, we have worked with more than 50 farmer producer organization. And the first year, I think when we started off, the journey was definitely not easy because we come from a corporate, we talk about supply chain, we talk about Lean Six Sigma, some of these fancy terminologies. But when our consultants hit the ground, we had an experience. And I tell you, first year, it was more of a learning than a success. But I think those learnings actually helped us to build on, the next year's engagement, how we want to look at some of our supply chain processes with the FPOs. Terminologies are, sounding very fancy, but let me tell you, when we work with these FPOs, these were very simple and fundamental and basic solutions that we could work around with them. And I think that's what we want to probably share with this group. And we have some fantastic speakers here today who comes with a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge around this. So we're going to leverage on their knowledge and also, share some of your experiences in this dialogue today. So I think before we really get deep into the conversation of what and how of benchmarking, I would really want to, set up the tone in terms of explaining what do we mean benchmarking today. Because when we talk about business setting up benchmarking system, all of this is something very commonly and frequently used. And I think there is an understanding. But what benchmarking is doing in the agriculture space, for FPO is something we really need to delve upon. So I think let's start the session by understanding what benchmarking is. And I think that's from there, maybe we can sort of take up some of the important discussion points. So Amit, if I may ask you to sort of throw some light, when we say benchmarking, what does it mean? And particularly in this space, how do you think it is relevant? I think let's start from there, and then maybe we can get into the deeper nuances of it.
Thank you, Sheetal. So I've got some background so that, because I think not, as you rightly said, people are at different point of view as far as benchmarking and FPO is concerned. So maybe, do we have, yeah, okay. So, let me go a bit into the history that if we look at the FPO formation, While I think already some introduction has been made, but just to say, and also to give you a perspective, my team is involved with the FPO program in multiple places, including being the NPMA for 10,000 FPO program in Uttar Pradesh, and then of course Kerala and almost more than 24 states. And I think what we have been seeing is that if you look at the data from 2018 to 2023, in the last 5 years, there has been six-fold jump in the formation of FPO. We were somewhere around cumulative numbers, and this is the data which, of course, is being tracked by the Cornell team. That we were at about 5,000 FPO, roughly speaking, in about 2018, and we are now reaching about 32,000 FPOs. So this ecosystem, in a way, is really kind of at a big stretch point. And while doing so, what's also happening is that with the amount of resource and money going in, there is also a critical requirement of looking at for the purpose for which FPO has been formed, namely, if you see from farmer perspective, so how do you, ensure cheap access to services? How do you get credit? How do you also build market linkages? The capacity which needs to be built into these FPOs and process standardization which needs to happen is increasingly becoming a challenge. How do you differentiate between a good FPO and not so good FPO? Both, not just from the perspective of transaction, but also from the perspective of capacity. So I think this is a very, very topical point for us to discuss. I'll also quickly talk about, what are the current standards or other, matrices which are being put together. But just to say that these challenges are kind of resulting in significant issues when we are talking about the cost of credit to FPOs. Currently, I think almost and all of you have been involved in the FPO ecosystem. If you see, even despite banks are mandated to, the credit is not moving, at least at the pace it needs to move. In some cases, equity grant definitely is moving if they are part of the scheme. But beyond that, it's an issue. And again, if we talk to the banks, the question comes back to saying, how do we differentiate between the various capacity which FPOs are representing? The other, I think, critical issue which we have seen, and here I will take you to Northeast, is that a large number of companies who have been investing in doing a buyback arrangement with FPOs are struggling because they are not able to recover money. So whether they are investing in ginger, whether they are investing in turmeric, whether they are investing in pineapple, and so on and so forth. And a big chunk of that is really about, that once a contract is made, the inability to fulfill. So again, if you see it from the point of view of both the FPOs and the companies, finding out what is the benchmark, again, is emerging as being critical. And then, of course, the other part is customization of training. So while FPOs are getting formed, for the organizations which are involved in supporting FPOs, figuring out what is the base matrix on which we need to be targeting our capacity building and training programs, again, is becoming a critical issue. So next, please. So while we are doing that, I think if you see, this is an issue which has been identified. So as part of that, currently, there are several organizations which are working on this. NABARD has developed a system. The flagship program of the Government of India, the 10,000 FPO program, has also come out with an outline in terms of what would the matrix look like. And we are also seeing, breakthrough work coming in from various states. So, Bihar, for example, Karnataka, and of course, Uttar Pradesh, they have all come out with a way of trying to create benchmarks, which both allows FPOs to respond to some of these requirements, but also allows other stakeholders, whether they are banks, input providers, or the market actors, to engage with these better. We are also seeing in the B2B space, especially with NBFCs, they are also developing tools. But I think the point which I'm trying to make is that all of these tools are being made, but harmonization of that and at least a common understanding of that, because otherwise we'll see a proliferation of various benchmarks. There is a need to look at what is the level of harmonization and, where is it coming to. Already a role of that is being played, of course, under the Government of India flagship program. But there is a need to harmonize this better and come to a common understanding. And I've just outlined some of the areas where typically there is a need to look at which fulfills the requirements. So whether we are talking about governance, whether we are talking about technical capacity, whether we are talking about processing, or of course regulation and cooperation. Again, not getting into too much details, but for example, in many places, forget about capacity building or market, just ensuring regulatory compliance is an issue for a large number of FPO. So I think these are definitely issues which need addressal. And now let me take you to where I'm seeing in the next 5 to 10 years, why it's so critical. Go to next, please. Is that currently we are almost in the midst of creating very, very, very disruptive, digital public infrastructure. Now, a lot of the issues, so if 10 years ago, one would have asked who's the farmer, we would not have an answer, because the data would not exist. But today, I think a lot of that is now getting built out. And if you see, registries are getting built out on which federated data structures are getting built out. So, for example, AgriStack is already well on its way under Government of India, which would in a way revolutionize the way we look at data and data interaction between FPOs, farmers, land, and crop, for example. Similarly, if you look at OCEN, the Open Credit Enablement Network, which is also getting built out as a digital public infrastructure, that again would look at verifiable credentials, benchmarks. So again, what we are building today is going to be very important as to what gets fed into that ecosystem. What this means also that the credit cost is going to come down quite significantly with these coming into play, because the transaction cost or the issues about verifiable credentials, a lot of them will become an automated process, the same way you look at a DigiLocker and getting your Aadhaar. So, in that sense. And on top of it, the other two networks which I want to talk about, one of them is already operational with FPO, which is ONDC, where, for market access, already FPOs are getting onboarded and there is traction. And again, there also the same question on benchmarking is coming in. That, if ONDC is going to be the interface for these FPOs, where are the places where ONDC feels confident that, let's say, if a product has been sent out by FPO and on e-commerce product has been rejected, the FPO will have the capability to bring it back and improve. So, which we expect, let's say, at an Amazon or a Flipkart. So that's again the question which brings us to benchmark. And last but not the least, about last week, Skill India Digital got launched. So Skill India Digital again is a DPI which is going to focus a lot more on capacity building. Our big challenge has been that capacity building is kind of being picked up FPO by FPO, but a standardization, building out the LMS for that is again being built up. So across, for being able to access these DPIs and really revolutionize the way farmers and agriculture interacts with the economy, benchmarking is quite critical. So, I was asked by the organizers that, how do we frame this conversation? And I thought I'll share my perspective in terms of where we are coming from and where do we need to go. So thank you for giving me that opportunity to do so.
Thank you so much, Amit. So I think some of the keywords I was able to pick when you were talking about benchmarking, talking matrix, talking governance. You were also talking about some of the tools that are already available in the ecosystem, but we are still not at the common understanding, right? That's something is definitely missing. And with an increasing number of FPOs, when it comes to interacting with the private players, financial institution, or any other players in the ecosystem, I think you feel it's important to be able to differentiate between a good FPO or not so good FPO. I think I do have a follow-up question on this. I will come to you on that, Amit. But I think I would want to know from the ground itself, because when we say there are many tools available, benchmarking is must-have, all of that. We all understand the value. But Kuldeep, you are working very closely with the FPOs. Gujpro is a state-level producer company, and it has many other FPOs under this. So how do you look at benchmarking? We know these FPOs deals into different products. So there is no homogeneity. And I think when you say one FPO, I think Gujpro, I think, has more than 35 FPOs under it, right? How do you look at benchmarking? Do you have a specific approach? And maybe if you want to highlight some of the key tools that you're using or some matrix that you want to stress upon, I think that'll be very useful.
Thank you. Actually, in Gujarat, we have been working with FPO since 2014, and our association, my association, dates back to 2012 or so. So we are a kind of we are a federation, and our members comprises of FPOs. So we need to have some kind of a basic assessment or kind of feedback needs to be taken while admitting the FPOs. At the same time, you also work on certain business value, commodity value chains like groundnut specifically. So we have a very informal system. Actually, we have kind of a FPO profile which we ask FPOs to fill in up, but largely we take references from organizations, NGOs, or institutions or individuals which we know. We primarily try to identify whether FPO is genuine or not. Good. Like, for example, any cooperative institution or farmer organizations is built on these pillars, like democratic functioning. Okay. Then you have another transparency, fairness, accountability. Okay. The institution is transparent towards its core stakeholders. There is a level of accountability maintained. Okay. Then there is one members' economic participation. Okay. Fourth is the FPO is able to generate profits to services, members, and concern for the community. Nowadays, with these 10,000 FPO schemes, and over the years, I have seen that FPOs cannot be categorized into one box. Okay, there are FPOs and there are institutions in the clothes of an FPO. Because recently, I have seen that several individuals, for individual benefits, they have started forming FPOs. So those kind of FPOs also come to us. Yeah. But we do not outrightly say no, but we try every bit to kind of avoid such kind of institutions we work with. Because our value system is like, we are a democratic institution. We have a revolving board, we have a board rotation policy. Okay. And I have been associated since several years with the promoting institution. For example, if Aga Khan Road Support Program forms an FPO, I know that a democratic process has been followed. A lot of groundwork has been done. Similarly, there are several other institutions, Ambuja Cement Foundation, Tata Chemical Society for then Shikshan Samaj Kalyan Kendra. So we know that a lot of groundwork has been done, and from the ground, this FPO has been generated. So those kind of value systems are ingrained in the FPOs. So it need not be kind of a very effective FPO in terms of business turnover and everything. So genuinity is the first thing which we see while admitting a member or doing business with them. And then we work with them, and even if the FPO is not able to perform in terms of aggregating produce and supplying goods, तो वहाँ पे there is one weak link एक आ जाता है कि भाई उसको कैसे आगे बढ़ाया जाए. पर ये एक factor है. So very basic indicators are used, and these indicators cannot be compared with the private sector because private sector is much more organized in that sense. कंट्रोल मैकेनिज्म भी ज्यादा है उसका, और यहाँ पे क्या है कि फार्मर्स ओन द ऑर्गेनाइजेशन, और वो टाइप का बिजनेस मॉडल भी एस्टेब्लिश नहीं है. एटलीस्ट इन एमएसएमई और प्राइवेट सेक्टर द बिजनेस मॉडल आर एस्टेब्लिश, द प्रोमोटर्स और द एंटरप्रेन्योर्स नो व्हाट दे आर डूइंग. हियर इट इज काइंड ऑफ विद मोस्ट ऑफ द एफपीओज आई से वो सस्टेनेबल जो बिजनेस ग्रोथ होना चाहिए वो नहीं हो रहा है, वो ट्राइड एंड टेस्ट टाइप का मॉडल चलता है. तो दैट इज द केस विद द एफपीओज. इट्स काइंड ऑफ contradictory to the FPOs. That is why we say that the FPOs need a long hand-holding support. तो एक लंबा hand-holding support की जरूरत है. That's why this year actually हमारा भी एक chicken and egg situation होता है कि भाई हमारा भी we have to do business, we have to earn and then do the intervention. We do not have the luxury to invest in building the capacity of the FPOs. Okay, we don't have any grant support from any external institutions. और दूसरा कि एक जो बात आई थी कि मार्जिन्स आर वेरी लिमिटेड. आपका 1-2% में आपको ट्रेडिंग का मार्जिन में डील करता है. इफ यू स्टॉक इट यू गेट मोर मार्जिन, अगेन रिस्क आर एसोसिएटेड. प्राइमरी प्रोसेसिंग में भी मार्जिन बहुत छोटा है, हार्डली 2%. व्हेन यू गो इनटू हायर लेवल ऑफ प्रोसेसिंग, सेकेंडरी टर्शियरी, तो आपका 5% से ज्यादा मार्जिन पड़ता है. तो being a stakeholder in the FPO ecosystem, our responsibility is also to build the capacity of the FPOs, but we are not able to do it. But luckily, this year, I think we collaborated with Reliance Foundation, and we are doing what we want to do, taking a cluster-based approach to actually build the capacity of the FPO. The primary thing what we did is did a rating kind of a assessment of the FPOs. कौन से FPO ये प्रोग्राम में जुड़ना चाहते हैं, it will be a 3-year long hand holding support, because smaller hand holding support जो short duration नहीं चलता, तो एक primary assessment किया जो government quotient है, गवर्नेंस क्वेश्चन है, फाइनेंशियल क्वेश्चन है, फिर आपका ऑपरेशनल इफेक्टिवनेस है वो क्वेश्चन पे, पर एक बेसिक लेवल का पे जो भी ये बेसिक लेवल के क्राइटेरिया में वो फिट होते हैं कि दे कैन एसोसिएट विद गुड्स प्रो एंड वी कैन प्रोवाइड अ लॉन्ग हैंड होल्डिंग सपोर्ट. सो इट्स एवरी 2 months वी इंटरेक्ट 3 clusters. One is Sabarkantha, one is kind of Patan cluster, and another is Rajkot cluster. So Patan cluster is doing very well. So every 2 months, 1 month, 3 months, we interact with them, kind of capacity building program करते हैं, buyer को लेके आते हैं, कुछ business partnerships भी develop की है, फिर exposure visit ले जाते हैं, फिर internal businesses strengthen करने की कोशिश करते हैं कि भाई ये animal feed manufacture कर रहा है तो mandatory बाकी सब FPOs को भी इनसे खरीदना है. तो those kind of प्राइमरी इंडिकेटर एसेस करके उस पे फिर हम कैपेसिटी बिल्ड करते हैं. सो दिस इज अ गुड एक्सपीरियंस. इस साल हमको ये अनुभव हुआ है. तो एक जैसे कि मैं पहले पॉइंट पे थे कि लार्जर मिसकंसेप्शन है कि भाई ऑल एफपीओज आर नॉट सिमिलर, और गवर्नमेंट खास करके स्टेट गवर्नमेंट का मैंने देखा है कि वो ऊपर से प्रेशर आता है तो भाई एफपीओज के साथ एसोसिएशन करना है तो पहले एफपीओज को पहुंचते हैं. एक तो जो हाई इम्पैक्टफुल है तो उनको सामने से बुलाते हैं, और जो करते हैं तो जो मतलब जो प्राइवेट एफपीओ है वो आ जाते हैं उस हिसाब से. तो पहले ये जो गवर्नमेंट एजेंसी और प्राइवेट सेक्टर को ये देखना है कि भाई उनका शेयर होल्डिंग स्ट्रक्चर क्या है इंस्टीट्यूशन के अंदर, एक असेस करने के लिए डेमोक्रेटिक प्रोसेसेस फॉलो होता है कि नहीं. दूसरा कि वेदर द फाइनेंशियल डिसिप्लिन इज फॉलोड और नॉट, or whether the processes and activities are aligned with the cooperative principles. तो यही ये कॉर्पोरेट सेक्टर और बैंकिंग सेक्टर और गवर्नमेंट को भी ये सब चीजें ये इंडिकेटर्स पे बेसिक इंडिकेटर्स पे देखना चाहिए.
So I think you started your bit on you check first thing whether FPO is genuine or not, right? And that brings me to the point that when you start engaging with an FPO, that might be at a very initial stage of their operations, and then probably there are FPOs who are 6 months old, a year old, and maybe beyond, right? Do you think with the maturity of the FPO, your ranking or the way you look at them, the way you measure them changes? One. And when you say whether FPO is genuine or not, I may be wrong, but in my opinion, do you think there's a lot of subjectivity comes into the play? And if yes, I want to know how does that
Yeah, actually a lot of subjectivity comes into play. And as you say rightly, as the FPO means 2-year FPO, old FPO, and a 7 to 8 year FPO. It is not necessary that the 7-year FPO performs better than the 2-year FPO. Now, I would like to bring focus on the promoting institution, the promoters, right? In some cases, what happens is like the promoting institution, especially the non-government organizations, they are excellent in social mobilization, social capital building in that sense. Okay? They are also good at developing systems and processes within the organization, which maintains a level of good management and transparency part. But where they fail is in the market linkage part. Okay? And we all know that unless the marketing side is addressed, it is very difficult to sustain an FPO. So sometimes what we see is that even a 7-year, 6-year-old FPO is not able to cross a level of turnover. Since the last year, there might be in the range of 3 to 5 crores, not going beyond that. Okay? And they keep on kind of supporting this FPO, but that gap is not filled. And recently, what we are seeing is the corporate sector is also coming in. Like ITC is developing several FPOs, and several other corporates are also developing FPOs. But they see them as an extended arm of their value chain activity. Means they should be kind of aggregating the produce and sending it to them. So their scope is also limited. These kind of FPOs, with the fact that their mandate is limited to just one function of the value chain. So, and the other part is like a lot of subjectivity, like organizational effectiveness in terms of business. So we see that their intentions are clear and they want to grow. They may not be good in the business aspects, so they may not be growing every year. So what are the factors that limits them, their growth or their profitability? So we need to work in them. But the primary thing is that the FPO is genuine. good people, good leaders are running the organization. They have good intentions and they are contributing their time for the growth of the FPOs, because these are the factors which there are no direct monetary benefit to the governing board members in that sense. So we have to kind of look at from that perspective.
Thank you so much, Kuldeep. So, Dheeraj, I would want to come to you now because I think we did talk about the tool. Kuldeep is talking about the genuinity, the matrix. I think a lot of discussion. So, as an organization in the global front, how do you look at benchmarking? What your experience has been? And and if you have anything to add on to what Amit and Kuldeep were really talking about, but would really want to understand how does this benchmarking looks like when it comes to, looking at some of those partnerships and collaborations for these FPOs. So want to hear from you.
Thanks. So first I would like to clarify that I work for Rabo Foundation, which is a part of Rabo Bank Group. And our foundation has an objective of improving livelihood of smallholder farmers across developing countries. We are present in Latin America, Africa, South Asia, and Southeast Asia. We support smallholder farmers by providing access to finance, access to market, technology, and network. In access to finance, apart from India, in all the other geographies, foundation provides direct financing to producer organizations. Whereas in India, we work with our partner banks and NBFCs to facilitate debt to these farm producer organizations. Now, not being a commercial lender, in like a bank or NBFC also, our way of looking at producer organization is different. What we primarily look at is the impact our intervention is going to bring in the life of the smallholder farmers that are associated with that producer organization. When I say impact, we want to see, does our intervention help that producer organization grow its farmer base, make the farmers deal more actively with the producer organization? Does the producer organization provide inputs to these farmers at a lower rate than they usually buy from the market? Does it get them a higher price for the produce? Impact is a very important parameter. See, we understand, these produce organizations are not financially sound. They are not going to financially sound, be it 6-month-old, 1-year-old, 2-year-old, 3-year-old. And the reasons for that have been explained, in the previous panel discussion, even in this one. So for us, the criteria is the impact they are having. Another criteria is, it was mentioned by Kuldeep right now that promoting institution, the resource institution, that NGO that is associated with these farm produce organizations. Because we have seen in our experience that the role these resource institutions play is very important, right from, the formation of these farm produce organizations to, making them fully working, stabilized organization. These are ultimately businesses, these are supposed to be run as businesses. So if a resource institution is the correct one with genuine, motivation rather than not so genuine, we want to work with that. We have seen that in, pre-COVID era, before 2019, in India, we have supported many farmer producer organizations when, by providing them finance through our bank and NBFC partners. And we had not had a single default by any of these farmer producer organizations. That is itself quite a record. And we realize one of the main reasons for that is because of the resource institutions that, that were associated with this farm producer organization. So I think that's one very important, criteria. It was mentioned in the previous panel, and I think in this panel also, regarding credit rating for, the financial institutions for these FPOs. We have undertaken several initiatives in this regard. We have collaborated with MCREL, did a pilot for credit rating for the FPOs. there are other financial institutions like Samnati, which have their own credit rating tool to, grade these FPOs. But there is no industry-wide accepted practice that is there. And as you said rightly that harmonization is required. But it has been going on for quite a while, I would say. For the last 5 years, everybody has been trying to figure out. But I think now, with technology becoming more pervasive and there's much more data points that are being available, maybe now the financial institution can use this tech and help arrive at a better grading system or FPOs, which is accepted in the industry, which is not specific to a financial institution.
Thank you so much, Dheeraj. So I think I'll take a cue from the previous panel discussion. I think you did talk about some of the elements, which is the credibility of the resource organization, look at the impact that has been created. But help me understand, do we also think elements like an FPO has a base of 5,000 members, right? But on a given node, they're not really engaging more than 150, 200 members. And as a foundation, I'm sure the end impact that you look at is the farmers, right? Some of these key elements, do you think come into the play when we talk about how FPOs are sort of running their operation? Does that really, do we really get into that space, or do we really stick ourselves to the credibility of resource organization and probably the impact they might be creating?
Definitely. So, impact is also a result of how much active and how much bigger the base of the FPO is and how much involved are these farmers with the FPOs. See, if the ideal situation would be that for the catchment area of the FPOs, all the farmers are associated with that FPOs, sell 100% of their produce to the FPOs, get all their inputs from the FPO. But that is an ideal situation where it does not happen. In most likely cases, a farmer will only sell 30%, 40% of his produce to the FPOs, rest to the local market, because he's also, working with that local market for many decades. So that's where, the resource institution part comes in. It takes years and years to, make a farmer get associated with the FPO. The trust level between the farmer and the FPO is low. It will take time. It is not easy. Going from 50 to 100 to 500 members takes a lot of time. Still, they might be associated for a number of years. Still, they will not give 100% of the produce to the FPO. So, the resource institution, the kind of practices that it, gets, corporate governance practices that you're talking about in that FPO embedded in there and get more farmers are very important. That's also, when I say that we look at impact, if there is a high impact, it's a result of all these practices that are being, put in by the resource institution in that FPO.
Understood. So I think I would now want to move to Sami, so I can barely see you from here. But being an international organization, I think you've been doing a lot of collaborations, a lot of partnerships, helping, because I think that your organization that looks at how they can bring the viable economic opportunities for some of these institutions. In the light of benchmarking, what your experience has been, what has worked, what hasn't worked, or do you see some of the critical elements like Dheeraj put on some of the, matrix, Kuldeep is talking, and so did Amit. He also highlighted some of the tools which are already available. So just wanted to know your view on that and how does it work at your organization?
Sure. So good afternoon, and many thanks to the organizers, NAFPO, to having invited me to this discussion. Secondly, I have a little sore throat. It's not been getting better for the last 1 week. I don't have fever, so I'm okay. But then I was in two minds whether to come today or not, but glad I came because this has been a very insightful and inspiring discussion. Before I just move to the benchmarking view and comments, I'll just like to take 3 cases from my career. So one is, of course, I've basically been in the private sector since 1990 till 2017, about 27 years. and 14 of those years were in Africa. So you spoke about global. So I've seen similar stuff, in Africa, for example, and they call them as associations, but nothing like, the way the FPO ecosystem is evolving here in India. And certainly this is very enlightening. I mean, I think 10 years, 12 years, I would still say this is initial days for the FPO ecosystem to evolve, but it's evolving. Post 2017, I moved to the social impact sector, but I think the private sector has always remained within me. So fortunately for me, I started off my career with the social impact sector with my parent organization, which is ACDI VOCA. And this is based out of Washington, and they operate in about 148 countries, been operating for the last 60 years. So why I mentioned Bangladesh is because in Bangladesh also, you have something similar to FPO, which is called Farmer Hub. Instead of farmer producer organization, it's called Farmer Hub. But I think the one thing that worked for us in Bangladesh was the co-creation of the interventions with the private sector. And the reason why the project was focused on co-creation with private sector and was led by private sector thinking was because ultimately that made it sustainable and scalable. So if there's an idea, let's say a private sector has, and you can stitch that together with the agri landscape and take some of the risk initially in terms of doing a pilot and being able to show the success that comes out of the intervention. And eventually, once the private sector can see the value, the commercial value through that pilot, it will sustain and it will scale far beyond the grant money or whatever you say that gets pulled off. In India, we operate as Tanager, which is an affiliate of ACDI VOCA. And my experience with India has been for the last 1 year, but it's been Tanager itself has been there for the last 15 years. And we work with several mixes of private sector support, as well as with foundations like, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Walmart Foundation, etc. So in my view, so if I take the example of what we are doing in UP, Tanager is working for the last decade or so with a company called Mars Wrigley, the makers of, chocolates and chewing gum. And basically they came into, Barabanki district in UP because Barabanki district happens to be where 70% of the menthol is produced. 70% of the menthol in the world is produced. And menthol is required by Mars Wrigley for its chocolates, which are like, mint flavored, or its chewing gums, which are, mint flavored. Now, Mars Wrigley being Mars Wrigley, and there are not so many companies of that type in India. Gradually, I think that landscape is also changing. But they decided to get into Barabanki and look at what they can do for the farmer community. Starting from looking at increasing ag productivity through partnering with us and looking at what new planting materials can be developed, so that whatever planting materials were being accessed by farmers or whatever planting material were available to farmers could get to a next level in terms of better planting material. And today that's made a lot of difference in terms of the productivity that farmers have got. Similarly, on other inputs that farmers could use, in terms of what we call as good agriculture practices. And of course, in the value chain, looking at rudimentary processing and looking at what we can do in that rudimentary processing chain in terms of providing capital support for changing that processing unit here and there, so that the yield and the quality of the menthol that's produced is better. Of course, Mars Wrigley is not buying all of the menthol that comes out, and we work, in that program with about 4 or 5 FPOs. Within that FPO structure, what Mars Wrigley did, the short point that I'm trying to make, what Mars Wrigley did through Tanager was essentially to build the capacity of the FPOs. There's no doubt that FPOs, farmers are farmers and they're best at farming. If you have to turn them into an FPO, into an organization, there's a lot of capacity development that has to be done, and that all of us know. But of course, my notion about capacity development is a bit different. Like somebody said, you can take classroom lectures. Will that work with farmers? Probably will not. You'll have to do capacity development in the way that farmers can really benefit. But that apart, I think what essentially the company did was to look at every angle where farmers and the community could essentially get to a higher living income. Now, higher living income could be through savings on whatever they do on their farm, or in terms of better market linkages. So Mars Wrigley was also buying, some of that menthol. Also at the FPO level, they were supporting in terms of, putting up labs or putting up equipment to test the quality or to ensure that, better quality of menthol is produced. And eventually, and also, better planting material. And also getting some of the farmers to get into a additional business of not just producing mint or menthol, but also looking at the business of producing mint seedlings, which is, the multiplier business. And that is good because that's additional revenue for them. And that then takes it to other farmers and, more farmers benefit and all that kind of stuff. Now, similarly, we have also been doing, and that's a program which is coming to an end, which is supported by Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and that's in Odisha. So that's a purely grant funding, intervention. And it was for 3 years. During those 3 years, there was also Corona. So a year got lost for Corona. And while we did all that we could do in that program, we made small strides in terms of, linking with the likes of, let's say, Reliance Retail, in terms of potato sourcing, etc. I mean, the basic point that I'm trying to make is that when we talk about FPO, I think the big point that comes to us is the FPO sustainable. Is when we say benchmarking, is the FPO at a stage where it is sustainable? And then, of course, we can dig deeper into sustainability as to what sustainability means. Does it mean revenue or does it mean profits? Does it mean 5,000 farmers or does it mean 200 active farmers and 4,800 farmers not active? Does it mean just going there and doing capacity development for the sake of capacity development, or taking it to a stage where it is now ready to be picked up by a private sector, maybe one, maybe two? I mean, today, for example, Mars Wrigley is saying that if they're buying X quantity of menthol, they're prepared to buy, let's say, 20X. So that is, proof of the pudding that yes, the FPOs are now ready. Because there is, but in this entire process, I think what is also important to understand is, as a model, any private organization will have a little doubt in terms of sourcing directly from the FPOs. And we've heard that in the previous panel. For them to engage with an FPO directly, for them to engage directly with those 5,000 shareholders is pretty messy. So they will want some company in between. And that's where I think companies like us can add value in terms of you're dealing with just one company, which is Tanager. As far as the contract is concerned, we will fulfill it, right? But you have to support us in the entire sort of, ecosystem development. Without that, it doesn't happen. And you have lots to gain because you're sourcing directly from farmers with a certain bit of, margin for us, of course. So I'd stop there.
So I think you did talk a lot around, capacity building, how we look at benchmarking, how to become that player who sort of, facilitate linkages. I think I want to get deeper into when it comes to benchmarking, right? I'm sure when we say benchmarking, we are typically looking at some information, some data about the FPOs. Have you ever seen any challenge, or if you've had some experience that you would like to share with us, how does that implementing benchmarking looks like? Do you see in a case where probably the data is not available, information is not there? Because some of the informations are on the fingertip, but when we try to get deeper into, when you try to dig deeper into the sustainability element of it, did you see any kind of a challenge? Anything that you would like to share with us?
Yeah, so we have our own tool, ACD Avoca, which is called M4 tool. But then that apart, I think basically when a benchmarking exercise is done, what is looked at is, has the living income for the farmers, their household, has it gone up significantly? And that living income obviously encompasses a lot of, items within that basket of commodities that a household consumes. And then, of course, I mean, if you look at, what is sustainable? I mean, today, for example, the FPOs are working on the basis of the orders that the private sector organization is giving. The private sector organization at the moment is not funding. So they are going to the non-banking financial NBFCs, to source their financing need, including the likes of Samanati. But then tomorrow, I mean, in order to make that cost of credit cheaper, more competitive, there could be a case for the private sector itself to invest, right? And that is a case which has to be built by the market-facing company. Call it a market-facing company, call it an institution in the middle, which can then go across to convince the private sector organization. See, the private sector organization is not interested in scaling, not interested in procuring anything which is not scale. I mean, if ITC has to procure, they will look at procuring 10,000 tons. If Mars Petcare has to procure, they will look at procuring about 20,000 tons of wheat from MP, right? Now, for them to procure 20,000 tons of wheat from MP, for them to do that directly from FPOs and to be able to fund each of those FPOs, it'll be like pretty messy, right? And there would be cases of default, and they don't want to get into that. So essentially, I mean, as they get confident with the company in between, which is a market-facing company, and they know that this company has been doing X, Y, Z with the FPOs, the capacity has been built. There's a certain level of benchmarking that's been done, and it's now risen to a level where through that farmers can deliver to the company in the between, and then to finally to us.
Thank you so much. Amit, from your session, I think a lot has been talked about, how we look at benchmarking, why this is important, how it helps private sector to take decision where to invest and whether to invest or not. I'm just trying to take a flip side of it, where we are looking benchmarking, which could be a tool for FPOs or the organization to look at as a tool for their own continuous improvement. Want to hear from you. What are your thoughts? And maybe Kuldeep, after Amit, we want to hear your opinion on that, because we are talking benchmarking a lot. How do we benchmark and private sector can engage? But what about their own continuous improvement journey in this whole process?
Thanks, Shirul. So I think maybe, of course, a lot of conversation gets talked about on the private sector side. But when I was referring to benchmarking, I think benchmarking is not so much of a judgmental framework, but much more about, how would an FPO do at this moment, where am I standing? And vis-a-vis the matrix being standard across the area. So the benchmarking is also about looking at, governance internally of the FPO, the capacity issues which it might be facing. So to the extent it's, so in that sense, not a third party perspective. I totally agree with you on that, both of that needs to go in. I think I also, because one of the things which I also want to highlight, which I started off with, is that, see, when we were at 5,000 FPOs, there was a certain level of resource institutions in the country. And let's also understand that resource institutions are also have been built over years. It's taken decades, right? And all of a sudden, if we jump from 5,000 to 32,000, and if let's say the cooperatives are also there, SAGs forming FPOs are also there, and we continue to invest. So there is also one part is, of course, we build the benchmark, but the other part is who's going to do the sensitization? How is this information going to go out? And in my view, the traditional approaches, we may have to think a bit more disruptively. So for example, already many organizations are looking, including the government is looking at what are the parts which can go into a learning management system. It's now pretty well established that pretty much in every farm household, especially with youth, there is now a mobile penetration. So what can really be done, at least because there are many parts in this ability to assess oneself, which can at least be automated. And then there are other parts which RIs still are needed, or other organizations which are needed. So I think that's a fundamental thing which we need to look, given the scale. Otherwise, I think the current challenge which we face, and again, people in the FPO ecosystem are here, and also Kuldeep was talking about this, that many FPOs are at a journey where they may not be, able to figure out what's the outcome they must achieve, both for their incomes as well as, of course, for their growth. So I think both needs to be really thought together in terms of how do we expand the ecosystem, how do we go digital in that space, and secondly, that it's a tool which works both ways. I just want to give the example of where it is in practice. So if you look at in UP, where in UP FPO Shakti portal, that's what they have set up, and where some of the data is available for other parties, but increasingly the FPOs are also supposed to be looking at their self-assessment and then choose what kind of capacity building pathway they want to go into. So it has to cut both ways.
Thank you so much, Amit. So, Amit, while you talked about their self-reflection, they should know where they stand, where they want to go. But at the same time, I think you also talked about a lot of tools are there, right? You also said the resource organization, like increasing the number of FPOs does not really make these organizations also immediately ready for it. So how do you look at having something which is probably more central? Also, the element that maybe look at the capacity building of the resource organization when it comes to the benchmarking, because I'm thinking where when it comes to FPOs, I think before that comes the resource organization, and there also these difficulty lies.
So that's an excellent question. I'll try to give a more systems level answer to this because I think there are also very specific localized answers. So, and I think both need to be done. But at a systems level, if you see currently aggregation systems are being operated either under the 10,000 FPO at the Government of India level. Ministry of Cooperatives is also now involved in that sense that, you know, in the FPO definition, cooperatives are also being brought in. So I think while at an idea level, the aim was that the LMS, you know, there were institutions which were identified for capacity building some of these platforms, which I think is still work in progress. It has not really reached where we are because also any program needs time for maturity. But I think a focus on that and various organizations at least trying to rally around it is critical. Because, you know, we saw very similar things happening with the SHG movement, where Ministry of Rural Development kind of took the NRLM, really took the initiative, and everybody rallied around it. So I think it's really critical that rallying around happens instead of, you know, things happening just in isolation and not coming together. So convening platform is absolutely necessary for that. The second is, I mentioned Skill India Digital. So sector skill councils have been formed who, you know, who kind of ratify and accredit the courses which are going to be put in formally, right? So with Skill India Digital coming in, a lot of that LMS is becoming a reality. So ensuring that connection, I think the ministries are already talking, but we really need to look at how each of the ecosystem player onboards that quickly. This is one way by which at least a lot of that pressure which the current system is facing can be reduced to some extent. The second part along with this is also that with the existing resource institution, or whether we talk about CBBO or resource institution, whichever word we want to use, I think there has to be a stronger focus on how their capacity needs to be built, because they are being asked to deliver on quite a bit, but not necessarily invested as much as investments are happening at the FPO level. So, and here central and state partnership is also critical along with other stakeholders. That in some states where it's happening, it's working well. So there are 3-4 states. I mean, I give the example of UP, where central and state partnerships are working well in terms of developing this ecosystem, but it needs to happen across the board.
So we have a long pathway.
In this space, one always has that. But the good part is that just the fact that we are having this conversation itself is quite important.
It's a starting point.
Absolutely.
So Kuldeep, I think I want to hear from you. How do you look at to some of the points what Amit was highlighting, you know, while being closely working on the ground? How does that look to you?
It's similar to what Amit said. In fact, I also look at benchmarking as an enabling process. In fact, I worked in the accreditation field previous to that, but that was with the NGOs, not the. They too are poorly resourced and kind of the whole NGO sector, if you look at the Indian NGO sector, that sense. And a lot of problems which we are discussing for FPOs, even NGOs are kind of facing. So at that time, we found that a smaller NGO to accredit, it costed more than 25,000 or so. So if we it was kind of subsidized by Ford Foundation, and we tried to bring it down to 10,000 or so. But in the current context, if we consider accrediting on the field accreditation of an FPO, again, it would cost more than 50,000 rupees. So this being one of the aspects of benchmarking the FPO, it looks kind of premature at this point. So what we introduced was a transparency profile at that time. So what NFPO is doing, this was a detailed profile, a technology profile platform was available. It was called GuideStar International. So there is GuideStar UK, GuideStar Australia, GuideStar US. So these are kind of platforms where charities register themselves and the detailed profile is put in. Okay, like charities are expected to be transparent in the sense that they source their resources, money from donors. Okay. So the donors would like to know more about the FPO, their finances, how they utilize, what impact they have done, what kind of projects they are doing. Similarly, what I would suggest is bringing that technology platform for FPOs, and they put up their detailed profiles, like for example, identity of an FPO, like their registration certificate, where they are located, like the FSSI registration, EPIDA registration, all those documents are available. Then the infrastructure they have, like their shop, what are the businesses they are doing, if they have a storage facility or processing facility, the photographs and processing facility, their capacity of processing and all that thing. The number of farmers they have, the acreage area of different crops they have. They can also upload their projects, which they plan for the future, for which they require funding and all that thing. So this will be a starting point. The second could be kind of FPOs willing to register, kind of accredit themselves, like a platinum kind of a membership kind of thing and all that thing, where it's certified, like WhatsApp certifies it, and we have Twitter certifying certain handles. Similarly, this platform certifies FPOs which are accredited by them. So corporates would be interested, like corporates right now, they are in a dilemma, like which kind of FPO is impactful, like doing real groundwork, like FPOs and startups, like corporates and startups wanting to source sustainable products, IPM products, organic products, and all that thing. So obviously, no trader or individual private entity can provide such kind of products to them. So it is the FPO, genuine FPOs, who are doing real work at the field. They are able to deliver their results. So contract farming, sourcing of sustainable products. Then we have joint venture partnerships also emerge from this. For example, an FPO having around 5,000 hectares or 10,000 hectares of acreage land, and certain production is being done. So companies would be interested to have a joint venture them to develop a cluster for certain, setting up their manufacturing facilities or some kind of thing. So I think the first stage would be bringing FPOs on one platform and showcasing what they are doing it. And this could be followed up with certain capacity building programs. And capacity building programs, I also advocated in the 10,000 FPOs thing. I'm in the working group on market linkages. So capacity building programs also needs to be kind of not just classroom trainings. We also, like, for example, we focus very little on the business side of the training aspects, like business specific trainings. For example, an FPO engaged in aggregation and supply of vegetables, okay, or wanting to enter into vegetable supply chain. So actually the training aspect should involve a pack house, a local pack house, who are actually doing that. Okay. Similarly, an FPO wanting to enter into groundnut value chain. So we should be able to involve such kind of players to actually train them. There could be 2 to 3 days training modules which could emerge. And we are going towards that under our cluster development approach. The second stage is we are going into that aspect wherein business specific trainings are provided, and we have a kind of a very grounded and very good person associated with us. Will be involved in developing such modules, and we'll be taking support from various stakeholders. So that is the kind of interventions we are doing.
Thank you so much, Kuldeep. So I think I would just like to take one question and each one of you to sort of put some thoughts on that. So I think few things that comes out very clearly. One, there are some benchmarking happening, maybe not widely practiced. Some of the benchmarking, I'm assuming it's also something driven by the private sectors or the foundation, because that's the benchmark they put for FPOs to sort of work with them. And that's where the resource organization have to sort of meet those criteria. But just to make it as a common practice, not only to meet the requirement from the players in the ecosystem, but making benchmarking something as their own continuous improvement journey. I think 2 points from each one of you. what do you think how we can really achieve that at a larger scale and not necessarily a practice which is something being, told to them or being done because maybe you have to meet the requirement of a financial institution, or you have to partner with some of the FMCG who's gonna, probably buy your produce. And there are so many things, right? So just two things from each one of you, you think, how we can make it a larger practice in the ecosystem.
I can start from this corner. If I have to just pick two things, I think one would be the quality of the CO, and the other would be the quality of the compliance.
So actually, the FPO sector is already in trouble. Okay, in order to actually really bring in more successful examples, this need has to be realized. The one primary thing on which an FPO could actually, that's the first step which I consider, is building good leadership in FPO. Okay? If you don't have a good leader, then obviously the path is almost lost in that sense. So developing the capacity of the kind of leadership and more involvement of actors. Okay? Like, for example, the FPOs are so engaged or involved in their work, they really don't experience the need for, actually, they know the fact, but that need doesn't come out in the sense. So more external actors needs to be come in and kind of engage so that they can develop in future.
So for me, I think two things. One would be that there is an absolute need for an agreed upon benchmark, and for rallying around a common benchmark. And the second thing, which I'm borrowing from the SHG movement success, is that no matter who was implementing, but the person who was at the last mile and getting involved with an SHG, they had a very clear standard operating procedure as to what they need to be talking, so that there is a level of standardization at the last mile. So whether it is backed up by LMS, etc., all of that can be discussed. But I think getting that agreed across the board is crucial, because that determines whether the CEO has the capability and the all the frameworks which you're talking. So these are the, I think, in my view, the two critical things.
I think the resource institution that promotes the FPO is pretty important. They play a very important role in shaping up the processes and the kind of board of directors, the leadership the FPO has. So if you have the right resource institution, NGO in place, that is pretty important. Second, the FPO should also realize that it's a business, while it is, aggregating farmers at the end, it has to run as a business once the support from the resource institution goes off. Because we have seen in many cases that once that support goes off, then the FPO also dies, the membership, the farmers also withdraw. So two critical points, resource institution and the understanding within the FPO that, yeah, they have to, work as a business going forward. Another thing I would like to point out, not as a part of the answer to this question, but just comparing the FPO segment in India as compared to other countries that we are active, the amount of support, ecosystem support, the government support that India has provided to FPO ecosystem is unparalleled as compared to, say, Latin American countries or, African countries. There are many international NGOs which are providing support there, but the kind of support that the government is providing here to FPOs is on a much higher scale, resource-wise, as compared to these African and Latin American countries.
Thank you, everyone. I think before I just summarize today's discussion, I think we can take questions if there are any.
So,
yeah, please go ahead.
okay. So this is Amjad, and this is really a very, great discussion happening here. But after, listening all these discussion, I'm just wondering, there is a term like evaluation, assessment, health check, and benchmarking. So when we are talking about benchmarking, it has great relation with the environment in which we are playing. So you are setting some standard with comparing with the leaders, comparing with the recognized standard in that particular environment. So here, people are talking about the internal governance, people are talking about the internal system, people are talking about the profit, everything, largely internal side of the organization, FPO. But benchmarking is having great relation with the standard of the environment, where some has said something. So I think to find benchmark or standard, we need to have some kind of, probably they may have some kind of a standards of compliance, standards of financial, standards of some kind of ratio relation to business. And it has been there. And some FPO or some individual, some program may have created that. The problem is we all are working with some set of FPO and we are trying to have our own. And we are not looking the entire environment where one has created, like Tendulkar, he has created benchmark of some like cricket or bowling or something. So this is a benchmark. You have to reach there if you want to be a cricketer. So I think large discussion is happening internal side of the FPO, but we are not looking at the large environment where we have to have completion with the individual one.
So is there a question or a comment? Because I think Amit did touch on this element
Yes.
a bit where he's talking about standardization, he's talking about having a common tool.
Yes.
So
But
do you have a question to any one of our
actually, I
speakers?
work with the scope inside. They have tool for international grading of FPO in relation to the bank linkages and things like that. And India, we have taken 50 FPO to, grading and knowing whether they are able to get international finance or not, whether they are able to get finance or not. So only out of 53 were qualified. And we were discussing this. Okay, we need to have international or a standard benchmarking. So everyone has their own standard, their own processes, but they are not looking at the environment. So I'm not very much aligned with the FPO sector. But I know, somewhere in India also, you may find some standard and you have to pick that, and then you have to have some kind of ways to compare yourself with that standard.
Just in 2 seconds, I would like.
Please.
Actually, we are a federation of FPOs, and several inquiries come in, like they always want to see a good FPO. Other FPOs want to see where they want to have an exposure visit and learn about the FPO. So it is always confusing for me to which FPO to show. Well, that is the level of problem. So I will end up suggesting only 1 or 2 FPOs in that region. Because in my state particularly, I don't find many examples which we say that these are the best standard FPOs where we should send them. Because somewhere everyone is lacking in that sense. Some might be very good in business, but the governance, it completely fails. So we cannot kind of consider them as a standard example of an FPO. So that is a dilemma we face currently in that sense. So this is just a short answer.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you. Very interesting session. Thank you all. While we have a consensus on, having a benchmarking for FPOs, and I also see, what Amit had actually suggested in his entire presentation as well, that there are elements where we are looking at benchmarking at the level where FPOs are on a survival mode, and we want to support them through financial, helps and other. But there are also FPO which are at the level where they are about to scale up to next level, probably go to export side as well. In those elements, we should also include in our benchmarking, we should also include the sustainability aspects as well. That'll make it wholesome. It's just a suggestion. And I saw that, while we are focusing on quality, these benchmarkings, which which has been showcased here, are bringing out, in terms of financial stability of the FPOs, quality of products and everything. But the element of sustainability, if it could be also be added, will be really great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, please go ahead.
The South Asia is basically smallholder farmers, right? So this is nothing new in terms of agri production and the food system. And the farmer cooperative, whether we call it cooperative or associations or farmer producer organization, has been in existence, one of the largest example is sitting in the panel, right? Rabobank. So there has been examples of such thoughts internationally, even in developed countries and in the South Asia. So from the international perspective, what are the things which has been done? Has there been any documentation on those areas where we can learn and see whether those learnings can be contextualized in the Indian ecosystem? So that's the question.
Your question is pointed to a particular speaker, or?
So the international player, ENY has international presence, Rabo has, right? So Tanager has.
Dheeraj, you wanna take up?
So there are many, international organizations that are working for development of FPOs in these, developing countries, basically. Has all these resulted in one unified standard for the FPOs, or has there been a learning exchange from one country to another country? I see agriculture being very, localized, practice. Those learnings related particularly to the crop breeding definitely are not, transmissional, but yeah, the basic nature of cooperative and how that cooperative can be grown big enough to make its farmer members more productive. Those kind of learnings are definitely, transferred between, say, within Rabo itself. We see, we have our learnings from when one region to another region. We see that the kind of FPOs that we support, say, in Indonesia and the one in India, we see the transfer that's happening there. We exchange notes. We know what works in one and what cannot work in another region. So within Rabo, yes. Does it happen within two different donor organizations? There are exchanges, but not at the level one would expect. So there are, networking events like this where definitely the organization meet. There are, joint projects, but the collaboration is for that projects only.
Yeah. So maybe I'll chip in. So part of the answer is yes. I think there are experiences which exist. So if you look at in Indonesia, or Vietnam, for example, or Brazil, or under, for example, initiatives like Agra in Africa, there are examples which exist. But if I look at those examples, and some of them I've personally been part of, is that many of those are multi-stakeholder platforms with smallholder guidelines. I mean, ISPO, RSPO, coffee roundtable, cacao roundtable, shrimp. I mean, the list goes on. There are multiple such roundtables which exist, which have developed standards. And I think I also go back to I think I would say forward for its time, 2006. The journal, the manual which came out on producer organization by Chris Penrose Beckley. Some of them have also mentioned that, but I think in India we are in a unique environment given the size. So what's happening is that at 32,000, if we are supposed to be going to 50,000 or 1 lakh FPOs, some of the standards which have been talked about, and I think many of the organizations, at least what I see in the ecosystem, are definitely trying to bring in that experience. But because the FPO, in my view, ecosystem is coming from multiple point of views. So there is the corporate buyback relationship, FPO orientation, the NGO oriented, NABARD and SFHC oriented. So I think because of the focus which has now come in over the last 4-5 years, there is a need to maybe have forums more like these, where we are able to have a common conversation and slowly also look at, see, the key actors in this are definitely the FPOs themselves. From a scheme and funding perspective, the government, state government and the center, and for sure banks from an NBFC credit from input side, and we don't really have a platform like that currently. Under 10,000 FPO program also, working groups now have been set up, but also that's after 2 years, because so I think it's getting in place. But at the same time, in my view, many of those benchmarks, the way we are getting disrupted with technology, and where we are going, we have to, yes, sure, refer to them. And in my view, in places we are referring to them, but we also have to look at how do we almost create a trailblazing new paradigm, given the context and the size at which we are operating.
Yeah, so I think great point, Aline. Thanks for bringing that up. While, Amit, you said there are successes in Africa, Indonesia, and elsewhere in the world, I think we can just keep ourselves focused to India, because India is pretty unique in the sense, like what's been said, 5,000 to 32,000. So clearly over this, decade or more, there have been some success stories. I think the time has come for somebody to take this up and compile these success stories and basically talk more about it in terms of, what the journey of that FPO was, or what the journey of that cluster of FPOs was. And I think being India specific, there will be a lot of learning that other FPOs, other NGOs, other ecosystem players can actually learn from. So great point. Thank you. So, see, look, in the social impact sector, NGO sector, we do these baselines and midlines and headlines, right? So in a way, that's kind of benchmarking to see where have we progressed, from baseline to wherever. So sometimes in some projects, there are midlines that are done more often than just, midline. Maybe a yearly sort of assessment of what the progress has been in the form of an annual progress report. So that's all I can say from my experience. But I'm absolutely with you in terms of, creating a dashboard of what are the metrics around which the benchmarking need to be done. And once that's agreed, it's a dashboard which is live and which is not like a one-time thing, but it's like more continuous.
Thank you.
Same point of view, saying that, benchmarking is not supposed to be a one-time. It has to be a continuous process.
Thanks, Amit. Yeah, I think this is the last question we can take.
So, we're talking about FPO benchmarking, but what about the federation of FPOs? What kind of benchmarking we should have? Because that will be also a success factor as to how federations will lead FPOs.
Majority of the benchmarking parameters will be similar, because it is formed on the same principles as an FPO is formed in that sense. Again, the part is like a very important component of an FPO becoming sustainable. There was a point, is member engagement. That's very important point, because the FPO structure is designed such that it will be very difficult for a formal banking or financial institution to lend to the FPO. As Mr. Mathur had said in the morning, they will look for who are the 51% who holds the shares. In case of an FPO, it could be 200, 500. So you cannot take sign of everyone. Most of the case, wherever we have applied, even HDFC had come, ICICI Bank, the credit team usually comes up with this question. Okay, when you are able to offer collateral, then that's not an issue in that sense. But similarly, the principles are same. So the benchmarking, most of the criteria would be similar for an FPO, because the strength of the FPO is farmer, and for a federation, the strength of a federation is the FPOs. Okay, so the level of investment in the form of produce देते हैं credit में. I will speak in Hindi because I will be more articulate in Hindi. उस हिसाब से कि पैसा आना है आपके फार्मर के पास से, या तो इक्विटी के फॉर्म पे आए, या तो फिर वो क्रेडिट के फॉर्म में कि प्रोड्यूस है, कि प्रोड्यूस दिए और प्रोड्यूस हम बेच दिए. और आप जो सक्सेसफुल एग्जांपल है हमारे यहाँ है ही, पहले शुगर कोऑपरेटिव्स थी, तो शुगर कोऑपरेटिव सक्सेस एग्जांपल है एक टाइप का. अभी सब गिरने लगी है, पर पहले एक स्टेज पे सक्सेस एग्जांपल ही है. फिर मिल्क कोऑपरेटिव्स है. यहाँ पे क्या है, फार्मर का ही इन्वेस्टमेंट है. आप समझिए कि आपने शुगर दे दिया, 1 महीने 1.5 महीने के बाद आपको पेमेंट मिलता. आपका काफी सारा वर्किंग कैपिटल साइकिल है शुगर फैक्ट्री का, कोऑपरेटिव का, वो फार्मर के पैसे से चलता है. सिमिलर इज विद द मिल्क इन द सेम सिस्टम. और दूसरा एक आपका भी जो प्रश्न है उसमें देखना चाहिए कि यूरोप में भी बहुत सारी कोऑपरेटिव्स है. ग्रेन सेक्टर में है, मीट सेक्टर में है, फर्टिलाइजर सेक्टर में है। तो आप फार्मर की प्रोफाइल देखिए, शुगर कोऑपरेटिव में भी फार्मर की प्रोफाइल देखिए, आप समझिए। आपकी जो कोऑपरेटिव बैंक्स है जिसमें भी जो एक्टिव फार्मर बेस है उसकी प्रोफाइल देखिए। कई बार हम स्मॉल और मार्जिनल बोलते हैं, ट्राइबल एरियाज में देखते हैं कि भाई इनको भी डेमोक्रेटिक इंस्टीट्यूशन बना, दे शुड बी टेकिंग लीडरशिप, दे शुड रन देयर ऑर्गेनाइजेशन, दे शुड बी सस्टेनेबल। समटाइम्स द केस इज दैट दे नीड गुड सर्विसेज, इट कुड बी प्रोवाइडेड बाय एन एंटरप्रेन्योर स्टार्टअप है या फिर एफपीओ है। कई बार मतलब वो बोलते हैं कि भाई जो जिसका पेट भरा हुआ है वो प्रॉपर तरीके से वो दूसरे एस्पेक्ट्स में एक लीडरशिप ले सकता है। तो आप सिर्फ एक ऑब्जर्व करिएगा कि मतलब जो हम एफर्ट डाल रहे हैं एकदम मार्जिनल फार्मर्स के साथ, वो कितने सस्टेनेबल इंस्टीट्यूशंस क्रिएट कर पा रहे हैं। क्योंकि उसमें भी एक प्रोफाइल चाहिए जो आपके लीडर्स की, तो वो लीडर्स की प्रोफाइल उसके बैकग्राउंड, उसके कल्चर, उसकी सोशियो इकोनॉमिक स्टेटस से कई बार निकलता है। तो दीस आर द प्रैक्टिकल रियलिटीज व्हिच वी हैव लर्न आफ्टर kind of working with so many FPOs in that sense.
Thank you, Kuldeep. I think in the interest of time, I'll just quickly summarize, what we've been able to look into the challenges in terms of what is currently being practices and what is the need. So we clearly know benchmarking is something really help FPOs. Not only that, it can attract partnerships with marketing institutes or financial institutes, but I think as a part of their continuous improvement journey, the benchmarking is a must-have tool. And I think what I want to harp here is that when we say benchmarking, at present, we don't have a common tool, and hence that we need to sort of come together to see, what benchmarking looks like to us. So having that common tool available, and one of the prerequisite, if I may say so, is having a standard process across. Because that's something you will only be able to benchmark FPOs, whether those processes exist or not. I think that's what Amit, you had pointed out in your closing remark as well. So that's a summary. And I think, Anisha, that calls a lot of work for NAFPO as well, because when we say having a common platform, a common tool, and everybody's talking the same language, I think that's more work for NAFPO. And on that note, I would conclude this session. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for a wonderful discussion. I think it has helped us develop a common understanding of the need for benchmarking and what really benchmarking is, and overlooking existing standards, tools, etc. With this, I would like to invite Mr. Mark Blackett from AMEA to help us summarize the discussions, set key action points, takeaways, and give the valedictory note. Over to you, Mark.
Okay, thank you. You can see me and you can hear me, can you?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Yeah, some of you might be wondering, who's AMEA? What relevance does it have for India? Well, let me explain a little bit. My name's Mark Blackett. I'm the Network Director for the Agribusiness Market Ecosystem Alliance. We've got over 30 members and partners who operate in over 80 countries, reaching millions of farmers. And some of those are in the room today with you. You've got IFC, Tanager and Grameen. So what we try and do is what you're also trying to do, I think, which is to really understand what's working, what's not working, and invest obviously in the things that are working, and create a system rather than a fragmented collection of projects. So that's I think that's our common aim, and that's why we're collaborating with NAFPO on this. We started off learning globally through our members, but in the end, we created local networks, and they exist in 7 countries at the moment, in Africa and Latin America. We build on what is already there, so it didn't make sense to create an AMEA India. It makes more sense to build on what NAFPO has already done. So that's why we're collaborating. If I think about what we've learned and how it applies to what you've just been talking about, I mean, data, absolutely fundamental. I mean, it drives everything. And it was really good to hear today people talking about the FPOs owning the data, using it to really understand where they are in their progression, and where they need to go next, because that's absolutely fundamental. But it's all, that data is also useful for everybody else, and the way in which we make this, the way in which we standardize it and make it publicly available to direct resources to tailor the services that are provided to the business, to the FPOs, and also in the end to become a credit rating sort of score as well. So I think you've got a lot of debating to do going forward on those multiple purposes of data, and how it's created, how it's standardized, and where it sits, and how it can sit there sustainably. But those conversations are also happening in all those local networks, you know, in Ethiopia, Uganda, Kenya, Benin, Ivory Coast, Honduras, Peru. This conversation is ongoing. So the only thing that worried me slightly was when you kept saying that in the last part that India is unique. Of course, the logic of our local networks is that you have to work within the context, and you have to come up with something that will work within that context. But I think learning about how to do that, you know, is useful across countries as well. So I hope you're also interested in learning from other countries, and of course AMEA is very interested in drawing learning from India and bringing that to the other networks. I think you concluded it fine. It's like, you know, in terms of where you need to go. I think you need to figure out what standardized data looks like. And the one thing that I would point you to is that AMEA has been working on this for 4 or 5 years now. There will be an international standard on professionalization of farmer organizations, which will come out. It'll be finally approved, I would say, by June 2024. The Bureau of Indian Standards approved of that process. They are part of the technical committee under the ISO. And so perhaps that standard is also useful to you, because you will be able to look at, so like, you know, the parameters that are in that standard and decide what out of all those parameters, which ones are the most useful to build the database and have it standardized across, you know, the work that you do. The other thing I'd say is that, you know, you could go for the big bang, the big, so like, you know, let's create the database and let's go for, you know, it being populated with all 32,000 FPOs. But I think our learning from different countries is that the best approach is probably incremental. And I think that was suggested earlier on today as well. And there's so many projects that are using so many methodologies to assess FPOs and also do baselines, to do end lines. I mean, there's so much extraction of data from FPOs that surely we can turn this around in terms of, clearly there are resources there already that are being used to generate data. Well, how do we leverage from those resources to build this database, this standardized database in India? And as you said, quite rightly, you know, India probably is unique in terms of the level of government investment in the FPO sector compared to, say, Africa or Latin America. So you probably have the biggest opportunity to demonstrate how this could be done. And that would be of immense value, I think, to the rest of the AMEA network. And the last thing I'd probably say is have a look at not just standardizing data, but looking at how to generate deeper learning on what the most effective approaches are. I mean, AMEA has done that and created a peer-reviewed toolbox. We know that work is not complete because we have not reviewed all, you know, approaches, all interventions. But the intention there is that we show which are the most effective tools. And so, for example, in there, you've got something from ICRA, which is all about agribusiness cluster development, which we think is essential, and you've mentioned today. You've got the best from IFC in terms of the agribusiness leadership program, which they're now digitizing, and it will go into a learning management system, which will become more publicly available. So all of these things, you know, you can look at and decide whether they are something that India can invest in, or you have approaches that you need to show to the world, and then maybe they become part of a peer review toolbox which we can trust in. And then the last thing I'd say is tools are only as useful as the tool user. We're certainly discussing within AMEA and looking at accreditation systems for service providers, because there's a lot of people out there who don't provide good services. It's not a perfect market. There's a lot of dysfunction in the market, and therefore we need to send clearer signals to the FPOs and others about which are the best services out there that are scalable in the end as well. And that's where the last thing I'll say to you is have a look at the ISF research that we contributed to, and that particularly looks not just at effectiveness of different approaches, but it also looks at the cost. And if we ignore the cost, we will be in endless projects and pilots. We've got to look at cost in order to really think about how do you scale up services to accelerate the growth of FPOs. So hopefully I've stimulated a lot of thoughts there. Reach out to me or through Anisha if you want to know more. Lastly, I just want to say, thank you to everyone for this. It's been excellent for me to listen into this and contribute to it. The panelists were great. Participation was excellent. And NAFPO, I really appreciate the collaboration with you as well. Being able to be part of this. And it says valedictory on that's what I'm supposed to be delivering, but a valedictory is a farewell. And I think everybody has concluded from this that we need to continue this conversation. We need to generate deeper learning that continues the conversation that leads us to true system change. So let's find a way very quickly to decide on how we can sort of take this forward. And it's not a goodbye, it's not a farewell, it's see you soon, I think. Okay, thank you, Anisha.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you. And I would also like to thank everyone for taking out the time to participate and engage in the India FPO dialogue today. We hope today was the stepping stone in the pathway of strengthening the FPO ecosystem. We have lunch organized outside, so I would request everybody to please have their lunch. Thank you.